which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'd like to call to order the December 12th Select Board meeting to order. No changes to the agenda tonight that I'm aware about. Libby, announcements?
Thank you. This meeting is being video and audio recorded. The Finance Committee has a public hearing tomorrow, Thursday, December 13th at 4 p.m. in the training room upstairs in this building on citizen warrant articles for the 2019 annual town meeting. There's no board meeting on Wednesday, December 26th.
Sorry, Phil.
Or January 2nd.
Or January
Right.
2nd. Thank you.
So our next meeting is January 9th, after
Next week.
the 19th. Is there any public comment here tonight that's not on the agenda? So please state your name.
Michelle Perry. As on the agenda, further down, it's with regards to the affordable housing and Surfside Crossing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is this when you want me to talk
Oh,
about
no,
this?
public comment is for anything that's not on the agenda.
It's not on the agenda. Okay,
Right.
so I'll have an opportunity to
Oh,
talk
yeah.
afterwards?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
great. I'll hold off. Thank you.
Okay. Any other public comment that's not on the agenda? Seeing none, there's no new business that I know of. Approval of minutes, payroll warrants, and treasury warrants.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That motion carries unanimously. All right, for pending contracts, we're going to do this in two steps. We're going to review the first, second, and fourth, and talk about those and approve them, and then we'll look at the licensing for SCPF as a separate item. So we'll split it up. Libby, anything you want to go over on those three?
I don't think so. They've all been been in the works, and the Roselli Clark Associates audit engagement letter you talked a little bit about last week, or I did.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right. So that's just those three. Now we're going to go to the licensing for the amendment to the license to extend the use of town property for existing erosion control project by 100 linear feet. So just give a little bit of background. We met in executive session last week and took a vote on this, and then it was put on pending contracts. There's some people from the public who would like to speak on this tonight.
Just to clarify the actual action of the executive committee.
yeah.
The motion was to approve the license agreement, the amendment to the license agreement. We did not discuss or take any action on when we were going to implement this. So just to clarify that.
Right, that was not in the motion.
In my experience, and I could be wrong, that typically those kinds of the actions we take come back into a public meeting for ratification, and it may have been legal not to do that. I appreciate that, but I'm glad we're having a conversation about it tonight.
Okay. Deanne?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deanne Atherton from the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy. And as you know, we sent you an email communication over the weekend asking you respectfully to reschedule this matter so that it can be on the agenda as an important item that many citizens are interested in. As you know, it's on this exhibit, which is part of routine contract adoptions. It's not listed separately on the agenda. It was really quite by good fortune that we even saw that it was to come before you for action tonight. As you know, this is something that citizens are very concerned about. We had a special town meeting within a special town meeting in October dealing with the issuance of a license such as this. And we just think that citizens should be accorded due process and an opportunity to enter into a dialogue with you to understand what this is about and some of the specifics. So that's why we are asking you to please consider putting it on a future agenda so it can be properly noticed, and any citizens who would like to come before you will have an opportunity to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Any comments from the board? Couple different things that we can do. We could vote to move it, or we could have a similar discussion that we had in executive session.
I think it would be a benefit to notice it as a separate item. I know I was looking for it on the agenda when the packet came on Friday, and I didn't see it, and so I was like, oh, well, that'll be a later date. It wasn't until I got Deanne's email that I would, because I tend not to look at contracts until like the day of. So I was surprised to see it there, because that's not something even I, as a member of the select board, look at right away. So I think it's appropriate to defer it to another time.
Don?
I mean, I don't mind bringing it up at a later date, but at the same time, I wasn't there for the discussion in executive session. I was there for the very beginning of it, and I had to leave to catch a ferry, so I wasn't there for the final talk and vote. But my understanding is that the actual action has already been taken, and we could discuss it tonight. I mean, if citizens have concerns and want to talk about it. But my also take on the initial discussion of this and on what I've read is that this is a pretty minor amendment that was unanimously supported by the Conservation Commission. So I know that the big, broader SBPF issue is of major concern, but I didn't actually really have it on my radar that this would be of significant concern to the community.
I think to that it was a little bit of an, I guess, an oversight on all of our behalves to not really make note of the fact that this is an issue, regardless of what license we're talking about, that the public has specifically asked to be a part of the conversation. So I think definitely in retrospect, it was something that I think we should have given a bit more weight and a bit more focus on making sure that the public felt informed. So I think the moving it forward, this was really presented as something that would be beneficial to the project. And so on one hand, anything to make this project better and less damaging to the bluff is something I would like to see move forward. But I also don't know what those implications are for having that project be improved if we do hold it up. So I don't know if that's something that George can help us with, or I don't really know what that looks like for the project actually being improved if it were to be delayed. On the other hand as well, though, I do want it to be very much in the public and a public discussion, because again, this is something that a special town meeting where there was an article in relation to projects like this was passed.
So just I've done a little research, as you probably know, but so the Attorney General has 90 days to take action on the warrant of actions at the annual town meeting. So I think I don't know when this was filed with the Attorney General. We're about 60 days into that, I guess. For me, the perception concerns me that I know that's certainly not our intent, but I just want this to be I think it should be very transparent. And also, I think, at least my recollection is, we've had discussions at the board about whether this would or would not be have jurisdiction by the vote to be taken back to at the annual town meeting. At one point, we were told it was, and then we did hear at the executive session that we could legally move forward with it, but we didn't take that action. And certainly I didn't anticipate that our vote at the executive session considered that.
Mr. Chairman, Stephen Cohen for SBPF. So I do want to state pretty clearly that this action is being taken, these improvements to the returns being taken both to protect the bluff and initially at the request of the Conservation Commission to make these improvements. This is not something that the applicant necessarily wanted to spend extra time and money on, but it was something that we felt was important to be responsive to when the commission asked about it. This is an amendment to an existing order to make what's a minor change to the design to provide that additional benefit. It is not a new license. I don't believe in any way it's covered by the town meeting vote. However, in the spirit of public transparency, I'd certainly not object to this being publicly posted and put on the agenda for next week, so that anyone who feels like they want to have their say can have that. I do think there's a little bit of curiosity to a group of people who attend every Conservation Commission meeting on this and are here tonight complaining that there's not enough ability to participate, since we're talking about it now, but why not? So, thank you.
Can I ask one question? I am not here next week, and I would like to be a part of the conversation, but so I don't know what it means from SPPF's point of view if this was continued until January.
It would be much more difficult to actually install these in January. We're really running up on the storm season starting, and once it's the problem is we've been holding off on putting in cover and fill because we're talking about the returns, and the ramps to get to the returns are over these, so there might be no ability to the whole thing is in danger when we don't have that fill there. So holding it off for another month might force us into a decision of just not doing it at all. And I don't actually have the answer to that question. I don't know. But it is possible that if we don't get around to this till January, that the decision will be made that it's a greater risk to not do it. I mean, a greater risk to leave them exposed in order to hold off for this.
For another storm season.
For this season, yeah.
For until the spring or until you have the weather to.
Correct, yeah. But it might, well, once we put that sand in place, it couldn't then be taken out to put these back in. You'd essentially miss the year.
I see.
So I don't know logistically when that call would have to be made, but I can tell you that a month would probably put us in that position. And we don't want to be in this position. It's benefit to everybody to have these go in now. So I don't want to suggest that we should proceed without you, but it might not yield the result that you want.
So I think, Rita, I always want you in these discussions. I tell you that all the time. You're kind of my go-to in this world. So I'd want you to be here, but could we have some discussion now so you feel comfortable
Yeah.
having it if we were to move it next week?
Yes.
Or is there this doesn't really make sense, but is there a halfway point where we pass this contract now and still have the discussion next week?
I'm okay with, I can make my comments now, and if everyone, it seems it's sort of a win-win to have it put on as a separate agenda and a discussion, and I'm happy to make my comments now if that works. So.
And Mr. Pucci's here as well, if you had a question for him.
Yeah, and my comments ultimately were, particularly because I was the one that made the positive motion at the executive session, is that this is something that really came to us as an improvement of the project. And I think this whole time this project has been painted to us as, this is an opportunity for us to learn. And so I think if we're going to, I really dislike the thought of Nantucket being used as a guinea pig for these kinds of projects. But if we are really going to try and make the projects better, design them differently next time, then I think we should be able to act on improving these, particularly when the damage that is happening is damaging to the bluff and to the environment. The two things that were important to me, though, is that one of the things I am very concerned about is the creep of a project. So where does this end? So we add 50 feet on now, and then the next person has the end scour or the flanking or the whatever it is, the erosion, and then we add another 100 feet and we add another 200 feet. That's one of my biggest concerns about this project, is that we are looking at it as 900 feet or 1,000 feet or 4,000 feet when the picture is really the entire South Shore. So I am concerned that this is the start of more to come, where we back ourselves into a situation where we can only armor. My other concern is, gosh, I had two and I felt so strongly about them. My other concern, the one is is that one of the things that has bothered me a bit is that as long as I've been hearing about this project, is there's been people denying that there would be end scour or flanking. And so part of the reason I made the motion I did is because I want the next board or this board to remember in however many months' time that the reason we are doing this is because there is that erosion, increased erosion on the ends. So this isn't a maybe or an if, it does happen. So when we allow these projects, there will be increased erosion on the ends, and they need to be addressed. And my other concern is that this doesn't actually fix that. So we will see. But that was essentially, those were my comments, is that I did make the positive motion because I want to see a better project, but it is with some reservation.
Yeah, I'd like to see this discussed. I'd like to do it next week, and I may not be here too. I'm rushing back to get here, but I'd like to, talk about it next week. I think if there's anyone else in the public who wants to talk about it tonight that won't be here next week, I think we should let them have their say tonight as well. I just look at it from common sense. You look out there, you see you have to do something as it stands. It is, especially the northern end, there is, sort of, it's creeping around the end, and we need to do something. I think, I voted for it, and I didn't think that we were doing any. I thought we were doing something good. The Concom, who's responsible for this, came and said, we'd really like to have this happen. It was a unanimous vote. I don't think we would have had a unanimous vote if the Concom was 5-4 or whatever. If they were a split vote, we probably would have been. We'd be here talking about it again. I think that this was, I don't think there was anything. Kind of sneaky or nefarious being done here other than improving the project that is in place now and that we're dealing with. I'll address one thing that Rita said, is the Concom is the responsible party. If this becomes arming the whole island, then the Concom, we have plenty of protections in the MOUs to say if there's no beach left, the Concom can say it failed. If there's, if it's going to have to armor the whole island, the Concom better say stop, So I think that they're the responsible party for this, and that was when we voted on this. We copied on purpose. We copied the Concom's wording because they're the ones. We in the MOU it says that they are the body that is dealt with the responsibility on the oversight and that part of this. And so we copied that wording because we do the license if it's necessary, But I think we're difficult. I don't want to be in the situation we were last time, where there was two different things going on, So I think that I think it's appropriate to have this next week. I think it's appropriate to discuss it. I do want to warn people that we're elected by the public. We can't put our fingers in the air and ask, and see what's popular every time. Sometimes we have to gather as much information as we can get, and that's difficult, as I complain about constantly, and we have to make some tough decisions. And I think that, so some things are emotional, but at the same time, we're here and we have to dig through that and make the right decision for the island. And there's a lot more to this than just yes or no. Neither side, it's not as black and white as either side of this issue portrays it. And it's very complicated. So I just think that we made a good decision in a very complicated situation.
Thank you, Matt.
The important piece to me in this was that the entire amendment was initiated by the Conservation Commission. It was not initiated by SPPF, and it was unanimously supported by them. For a reason, I do want to see it done this winter if it's causing an issue on the ends.
Arthur Gasparo, engineer for SPPF. I'd just like to take a couple of minutes to not go over the entire project, but maybe just give a little bit of a flavor of what we heard tonight and exactly what was proposed. Essentially, these returns are angles. And it's not necessarily a result of end scour or damage. It's when you have the current geotubes, which are protecting Baxter Road, the unprotected areas continue to naturally erode at the natural rate. So any sort of coastal stabilization, whenever it comes to a point that it ends, and you have the natural retreat, there's always going to be a spot there of having to keep up or extend to not then have, a flanking that comes behind your entire stabilization. End scour is, in my experience, a fairly localized effect. I understand that it's highly debatable in the coastal engineering or environmental community, but in this case where you have such enormous amounts of nourishment sand that are also being added, all of the studies that have been done, the greatest level of monitoring of any project I've ever seen, is not showing. You don't have large areas where, adjacent to the property, it's much more eroded than it is when you go down the shoreline. The shoreline is essentially the unprotected shoreline continuing to naturally erode. All that being said, the 50-foot extensions are angles. So from where the geotube currently ends, it's just to come back to meet that natural piece of the bank. The other piece is that's where the ramps are that I know have been a point of a lot of discussion to get to walk up and over. And what happens is during the storm events, when the sacrificial sand that's at each end of the geotubes are nourished and contributed to the system, they're fairly steep and the ramps are somewhat lost. They become somewhat vertical. These extensions are going to be solid coir fiber rolls that are stacked and they're 20-inch diameter. And I can tell you from the other projects that we have on the island, these are easily mountable. So essentially, when the nourishment cover is gone, someone would, a member of the public could still walk up these versus the vertical scarped erosion that's happening causes that period of time where the ramps are no longer accessible. In terms of timing, I think time is of the essence. I'm not here at all to pressure the board and understand the concern, but at the same time, we've gone through the entire public hearing process on the amended order of conditions with the Conservation Commission. It's been well vetted. There's an enormous order of conditions that is in effect to provide the monitoring, the nourishment, and at this point, a relatively small extension that's going to essentially the gap that's there from the end of the geotube. Nothing is failing. Nothing is really damaged. It's so that through a storm season, you don't have that happen behind the geotubes that are there, and as well facilitates the passage. The longer this goes, the less likely it is essentially to be installed. So I do think that it would be beneficial to approve the license and allow this installation to proceed. And I'd be happy to.
We've already approved the license.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Can I just, on the last comment, why is it the longer it goes, the less likely it's not going to be installed?
Two things. One is that we're all of a sudden getting into January. Think about last winter, storm after storm. You have to mobilize to put these things in. Number two, there is a large amount of nourishment material that gets placed as Mr. Cohen referenced, at the ends of these geotubes. And essentially, they're holding off on putting that sand there with the understanding they got approval to install the returns. So one or the other has got to go in. If they have to wait an unknown amount of time before they can mobilize, start building it, they're going to put the sand in instead. Thirdly, this is essentially, this permit expires in September. There was a 1-year extension for the whole thing. So at what point is you're getting in through the winter, it won't make sense. So again, I think that it is time. They thought that this installation was going to occur in November. That's when the Conservation Commission approval was granted. But essentially, the then ran up against yet another regulatory hurdle, which has taken even more time. I think the expectation was that this was already going to have been mobilized, but respecting the process of the license.
Did that answer your question? Kind of.
I could talk.
Yeah, we could go on
I know.
the details. Thank you, Arthur. I just want the board to know that it's my responsibility to approve what goes on the agenda, and there was no trying to fast track it on my part. I really didn't, because of CONCOM reviewing and approving it. I really didn't think. In hindsight, we'll put it on the agenda. We'll talk about it in the public, but there was no me trying to sneak it through or anything.
Oh, sure.
Just
Can
wanna-
I make one more comment?
Yeah.
Just a quick one in response to Matt's comment on having Concom as our sort of regulatory watchdog resource for this. I think this is something that I will continue to adamantly disagree with you on. That I really see this as a policy issue, and I think that it should be our decision. I think Concom is looking at these through a very narrow lens of interpreting the wetland regulations and looking very specifically at certain environmental issues. And I think that if we are going to continue to armor anywhere, that ultimately becomes a policy decision, and that rests with us. So I think Concom is a resource, but I think ultimately it's the select board that needs to make that decision.
And I agree. And in fact, throughout our executive session conversations, and even here, we've talked about the fact that, we rely on the Concom for what maybe I'll call the scientific basis and recommendation. And we've heard from town council that just because Concom approves something, we don't have to issue the license. So I think coming here is an important step. And I agree, it's a policy decision.
Well, I've got to defend myself. I'm not saying that we don't have a policy role. What I'm saying, though, is that the license that we're under, the MOU that we're under, references Concom as the responsible party to see how this is, see if this is working or not, to claim failure. We can't, if we went and claimed failure, we can't do that. That's not our role in this, the way it was set up and the way it was agreed upon between us and the other party. And that's the point I'm trying to make. And I think people, so anyway, I don't need to beat a dead horse. I agree we have a policy role, and I think it should be a lot bigger than it is a lot of times. And I think a lot bigger and look at these issues from a lot bigger perspective and from a historical perspective in many situations. But I think, for this specific thing, I'm addressing a specific deal that we have in place.
It's totally different, a new project compared to, this is an existing project.
Are we ready to take this discussion to next week? For a motion?
Can we, one other question, is there anyone else here that won't be here next week that wants to talk about it?
Peter? Thank you, Matt.
Hi, Peter Brace, Nantucket Coastal Conservancy. Mr. Chairman, just a point of clarification. The Concom's decision was not unanimous. It was 6-1. Commissioner Ashley Arisman voted against it.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
We definitely got the wrong information. Though.
Yeah. Sure. We are talking about this.
Just a point of information is that it's my understanding, and maybe Jeff can corroborate, is that while the public hearing is closed, the amended order has not been issued. I'm assuming that it will be on the agenda for next week, and the commissioners will have to sign it and issue it then. Is that correct, Jeff?
No, that amended order was issued at that public hearing, as is typical practice with all amended orders of conditions.
Have we seen a copy of the order, of the language of the order?
The language of the order reads with the addition of the new plan of record for the extensions exactly like the old order.
Okay. And the second point I'd like to make is that our concern is not with the project. We participate in the process before the Conservation Commission. What we would like to discuss with you, not now, is the whole issue of the license. And we have questions about the license, and we'd like to understand, this is very important for us, it's just coming off special town meeting. So we would like to become better informed, and I think we have some questions for you about the license that will help you. So please don't misunderstand, we're not here to discuss the virtues of the extensions, and in fact, we might well agree about the extensions. Our focus is more on the license.
So could we pass this now then and talk about the license next week? If we're not talking about the extensions?
Well, Mr. Chairman, what I'm understanding is that what's before you is to adopt the license, is to issue the license. So,
Yeah, yes. We can go, yeah, go ahead, George.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the board. George Pucci from KP Law, Town Council for Nantucket. Tonight's agenda item is actually just to announce in open session what the vote was approving this license amendment. So if you want to put it on for another agenda item, that's fine. It's within your purview to do. Nothing illegal about doing that. But the result of that will be one of two things. If you put it on and no vote is taken to overturn the vote approving it, then it stays in effect. Or you, the result of that further discussion, someone would have to make a motion to, basically overturn the 4-0 vote that you have approving the license amendment. So right now you have a 4-0 vote approving the license amendment. And so that, for you to then not go ahead and sign that license amendment, someone has to make a vote and then it has to get approved to overturn that vote and to deny approval of this license amendment. But right now, you have a 4-0 vote approving it. That's all I wanted to point out is that, you're free to discuss it as much as you want, but that vote is in effect until somebody makes a motion to overturn it.
But we still have to ratify it, though, correct?
No, you
open
don't.
session.
You voted it in executive session. What you would do typically, customary practice, you've done this before, many boards do it. Some issue will be discussed in executive session, a vote is taken, and then that vote is announced in open session, but it's different from a ratification. Ratification would be more something like, some emergency occurred and, an agent signed something, and then the, the issue of ratifying that act would go back before that board with authority. But there's nothing to ratify here. You've already voted it. It's just a matter of announcing that vote in open session, which always occurs when there's a vote like this in executive session. Like say you settle a lawsuit, vote to settle a lawsuit, you discuss that in executive session, you have a vote whether or not to settle that, then you would take that and you would announce that in open session so that the public knows what occurred. But that's not a ratification of that vote. It's just an announcement in open session.
Okay, so by approving it, we're announcing it. It's one and the same.
Correct. So my only point is you have a vote approving it. If you put it on for another agenda item, one of two things can happen from that. You either end up with that same vote approving it, or someone votes to overturn that prior vote.
That's clear. So, George, while you're there, because I think we've gotten, my recollection, we've gotten a couple of different opinions, and to the point of the warrant article that was passed at the special town meeting, within the town meeting, about requirement of these matters to go before, the license agreements to go before a town meeting. I know at one point we had a conversation about the Attorney General may think that's maybe this isn't the correct term, an abrogation of the powers of the board. But then I think we have town council has issued that if the article was in fact approved by the Attorney General, it would have to go. So I'm confused. If you could clarify that, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly. I did give an opinion to the board, a summary of the history of this that came before you, and my opinion on the bylaw amendment. I believe that was produced. I'm going to describe it in answer to your question, but was that produced? Libby, I thought you produced it yet. So anyway, my opinion that gives the answer to your question that I provided the board before the executive session gave town council's opinion on that. That has been produced now to the public now that you announced the vote in open session. The answer to your question is I gave an opinion that since it did involve a expansion of the project footprint that's referenced in your prior license, that if that bylaw were in effect, it would require going to that town meeting vote. But I also said that bylaw is not in effect right now, So you're free to grant the license amendment if you so choose.
Just two
If there's-
minor points, which is essentially that you can cancel this license at any time, and and as Art said, we're only talking about the project that's in effect until this September. So there's a different project that is going to come before you for a license for the whole thing, but at the moment, we're only talking about an amendment to the license that's for the project that is approved by the Conservation Commission until September. So I do want to make one suggestion for you to consider, which is that if the Coastal Conservancy has specific concerns about the existing and approved license, that they should submit those to you for consideration so that you can consider amendments. Because to get up and talk about something that's been approved for 3 years and now has had a minor technical modification to the design program that they don't necessarily object to, I don't know why we're going to talk about that again next week. If they want to
Well,
talk
because
about,
we've asked to.
yeah, no,
Okay,
that's fine.
that's-
But
all right.
but I don't know. But the purpose of it is, if they want to talk about the meat of the legal language or anything like that, it would be helpful to see, proposed amendments to the document, not just maybe we should talk about it again. I think everybody's time is more valuable than that.
Thank you. Dawn?
I was going to say, if there's specific license questions that we need counsel for, are we going to have counsel here next week? Or could this questions be submitted so that counsel can weigh in before the
Up
meeting?
to you all. We weren't planning on it.
I think it'd be helpful if he was here.
Is that feasible?
Okay, I'm hearing that George is not able to make it next week.
Okay.
So, I don't know.
Well, I don't want this going to January, and Rita's not here next week, and George isn't here. So
And John Giorgio, is he going to be here, or another someone else?
So as I was saying, George isn't here, and Rita's not here, and possibly Matt. I think we discussed it enough. I think we could have another discussion, but I'd rather approve this contract now with all these circumstances. But somebody can make a motion to.
Well, we already have approved it, unless someone wants to make a motion to overturn it, then, is there a motion to overturn this at this point?
Well, I thought we agreed we were going to bring this back and put it on the agenda for next week.
Well,
So
we can.
No,
but-
I thought that was the consensus of the board.
There's no motions.
Pardon? Pardon?
Was there a motion?
I make a motion that we put this on the agenda for next Wednesday, and encourage the public to come and have a conversation about it.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those
Sure, yeah.
aye?
Yeah, I'll take it. But I'd like to be clear on what we're having a discussion about. That's my only,
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't. I was hoping we were going to get discussion on the motion, but
Yeah, well,
I don't mind talking about this next week. But we're going to be a short board. We're not going to have counsel here, so I'm just wondering if there's any way we can get further tonight with whatever the questions are from the public.
So were
Can
you,
you just ask the
really quick, were you a nay? And I was a nay, just so we have it on the motion.
I'm a yes. I'm fine with
Okay.
discussing it next week, but I'd prefer if we could get questions answered tonight while we have all of the people here on our end that need to be here.
I have to make sure Florencia had that. It was 4-1.
I just wanted to offer, I can try to answer any questions you had tonight about it. We could certainly, if there are questions that the public had about, legal issues involving the license, and you chose to ask us to opine on that, we could do that.
Maybe
But right, it is what it is. I mean, the license, the original license speaks for itself. The amendment speaks for itself. The issue about the bylaw is pretty clear. I don't know what these legal issues would be about the license that you need further answers on.
Rita?
George, I suppose one is, does this decision set any precedent for future license decisions? Or is this very much a one-off?
It's a one-off. I appreciate that question because it gives me an opportunity to remind the board of our advice always is we don't go by precedent. We go case by case and the issue that's before you. So no, it would be distinguishable from the facts of whatever may or may not occur in the future. It is one distinct question before you. There's not much of a legal issue involved. It is more, the policy decision of whether you want to enter into this license amendment following the Conservation Commission's approval of, this amendment to the original order of conditions. So I always recommend taking things case by case and just applying the law and the facts to that particular matter before you.
And the other question I asked George was, is there anything that we should be adding to the amendment that might put us in a better position as we look forward to the other license? And you can answer that, but I believe your answer was no.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Essentially, it was, and the reasoning behind that was there's a couple of provisions of this that are important. The biggest one, it continues to be that this license agreement is revocable by you in your sole discretion, regardless of what Concom does or what SBPF proposes. And it incorporates all the protections that you have in place about indemnification and removal of the structure if so ordered, and if it doesn't meet performance standards. Another thing that's of importance to the town is this is not a inexpensive undertaking that you're going for. SBPF has reconfirmed their commitment and agreement to pay your council fees involved in the existing project, the project expansion, anything related to that. So those are built in. One thing that would occur is, in the future, depending on what, the time to be thinking maybe longer term would be with respect to the project expansion and whether you're going to, if that bylaw gets approved, if you end up before town meeting, the types of long-term planning efforts that you may want to have built into a new proposed agreement to be presented to town meeting, or even in the absence of town meeting approval, if that bylaw is not approved, you will have a bigger picture that you have before you that you'll want to address in any type of new license or lease agreement with respect to a possible project expansion. So what my recommendation on that is you wait, a little bit until that occurs, but it's really not, ready for prime time to be negotiating long-term planning issues with respect to dealing with one distinct erosion issue that they're trying to deal with the returns on the existing structure.
Get Rita.
George, I have more of a sort of longer term question in that I think one of the possible downfalls of this article, if it is approved by the AG, is that it's sort of holding us to these more sort of municipal bureaucratic timelines when we're trying, in this scenario, we're trying to be responsive to something that's happening natural cause. We're trying to respond quickly based on weather, based on a response to, again, natural conditions. In the future, if this is something that continues to happen where if, for example, we did have to bring this to town meeting, it wouldn't happen until April, which means we wouldn't be able to respond to an event like this. Is that something that in future would be potentially an amendment to the bylaw, the article?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, you raise an issue. Some bylaws have not been approved as of late by the AG, where a bylaw impinges on a board's executive authority, and on that very reasoning is that you're an executive body, responsible for a lot of the day-to-day things that the town faces. Emergency situations like this, where you have agreements in and you have rolling easements in place in case there's a breach in a certain place, to take your executive authority away and subject it to a process that has its own timeline without any regard to what's going on the ground is potentially problematic. But the only thing I would say about that is I think you're just going to have to wait to see. I mean, it was presented and it was submitted to the AG, and you're going to have to wait to see what occurs with that.
And potentially something that could be refined
It could
at a
be,
later
yes,
date.
by another article, further amendment.
Right.
But would we have the ability, if it is approved, to say this is deem this an emergency situation and not follow that bylaw?
It would be difficult.
Okay.
It would be subject to challenge.
And all these points were discussed last year when this article was presented at FinCom and other situations. We knew that this was this type of, it's more complicated than yes or no. This was, which is why I say that. This was some of the stuff that we're worried about, but, town meeting can be a very emotional animal and isn't really, isn't set up to deal with that sort of type of situation. And so I think that's why we're in, where we are now. But, and I think that's, so we knew this. The other point is that he's talking about, we did talk in executive session, sort of about the earlier point he made. We did talk about that. So it's, we kind of knew.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we good? On the agenda for next week? Okay.
Thank you.
So that's it for pending contracts. Moving on to consent items, we have gift acceptance, town administration.
Motion to accept and send letters of thanks.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That carries unanimously. All right, we have our first public hearing tonight. Is to consider application for a new annual liquor license for 38 Main Street.
Good evening. So we do have a new liquor license application for 38 Main Street, which previously was Met on Main. We included their surrender letter from October. They have left the premises and the lease has turned over. To the new applicants who also are managers of another liquor license at Sandbar at Jetties as well. They are applying for a all alcohol restaurant license, and the change is going to be from the previous licenses. This is a application for an annual license. The previous license was seasonal. So I think a good change to have an annual license on Main Street. There is no objections to this. We have the complete application from them as well. And as I said, they run another liquor license. We've had no issues or violations with that license thus far. And the only thing that we include on this is obviously with acceptance of the license or approval of the license, it is going to be dependent upon first ABCC review and approval, and then meeting the conditions of all inspections with all other departments. And also, as an annual license, any closure of longer than 3 consecutive days requires a written request and approval by town administration as well. Otherwise, no objections to this license. And the applicants are here for any questions.
Okay. Any questions from the board?
You want to take our questions before the public?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'm
public
asking,
hearing.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think. Is there anybody from the public that would like to speak on this? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Questions for the board?
So, Amy, and I don't know where it's in here, but there was a discussion about the changing the time. Maybe it was entertainment from midnight
Yes.
to 1. But is
Correct.
that, what about the alcohol? Is that,
The alcohol, it'll be the same. They are allowed to serve until 1 a.m. per law,
okay.
unless there was
Okay.
any specific restrictions
So,
by the board.
and did the current holder have that same?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So it was the entertainment that was a change?
Correct, and
Okay.
we'll address that in the next hearing. Yes.
Rita?
I would make a motion to approve based on the recommendations.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries unanimously. Okay, we'll open a public hearing to consider application for a new entertainment license for the same property, 38 Main Street.
Yes, so in discussing this license, they're applying for an entertainment license, not too dissimilar from the prior one. We've included what the prior conditions were. I'll go over a couple of things with that as well. The prior license, we did have a hearing in 2016. We brought them back in. There was some concern. There was some complaints from a neighbor behind the restaurant about the patio noise. We had a hearing, and at that time pulled back the timing of the patio noise or patio entertainment until 9:30 p.m. It had previously been 10 p.m. To play kind of have a compromise there. Speakers were moved a bit, and so we made some sort of abatement kind of conditions to try to make it less of a problem with the neighbors there. And then haven't had any complaints or issues since that time. In this side, and then inside is instrumental music as well. No music beyond 10 p.m. Or excuse me, 12 a.m. indoors and 10 p.m. for live music. Acoustic, really, not bands or a nightclub type of situation, but acoustic guitar, instrumental as well till 10 p.m. So as you mentioned before, they are requesting to have a later time indoors, extended hours to 1 a.m. for pre-recorded music. And again, we can make conditions for live music and such in that respect. It's not much difference than what was there. I did make one error after speaking to them this evening as far as what they're requesting on the patio. They would like to have the opportunity to have acoustic music out on the patio. So I want to kind of amend saying it was just background music. They would like to discuss the possibility of having a guitar or something such on the patio. We don't recommend obviously going beyond the stated times. If we want to discuss kind of how we do the perimeter of downtown, it is, 9 or 10 p.m. and not live music on the outside perimeters of those restaurants that we currently have. So that's kind of a discussion we can have with the applicant.
Any questions for Amy before we go to the public?
And I'll comment, that
Yeah.
has worked. And these guys realize it, but
And then one other thing, and I think I mentioned in tier 2 as well, the lucky thing is one of the applicants actually lives in the building behind the restaurant where the complaints came from, obviously knows the landlord, has had those discussions. I also sent him to the church to discuss this as well too, is, get to know your neighbors before we go through this. And they've done a good job of that too as well. So, it's a little bit of a different situation there. And again, we haven't had any issues with their current situation. They're incredibly responsive to anything that we have to deal with on that situation.
yeah, when I first joined the board, there was a sort of a thought process from some of the restaurants was, well, we're in the downtown. We can do whatever we want. We're downtown. And the reality is if you're on the edge of town, there's
Yeah.
a different standard that you have to hold. And I think people get that now.
It's difficult, and we'll probably be discussing this through the winter because there's lots of degrees of entertainment licenses downtown. I mean, Lobster Trap is on the edge too, and they have live entertainment on that patio as well. But on the Broad Street side, those do not. Right. So that's kind of where we are, just in the middle is where that outdoor music tends to be.
Is there anyone here from the public like to speak on this?
Hi, I'm Ginger Andrews. I live at 1 Stone Alley, and my bedroom window is one of those that's, kind of overlooks that patio. And I would agree that there hasn't been a problem up to now. I would be upset if there were loud music, after 10 p.m. on the patio. So as long as that's what all that meant, that's fine.
Yeah, I think the cutoff's 9:30 still. They're going to continue that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ginger. Anyone else from the public? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Questions or motion?
I'd make a motion to approve based on the recommendation.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, town manager's report.
Recently, I was asked to ask the chairman of the government study to come in and give a little update of what that committee is up to. So John Brescher, chairman of Town Government Study Committee, is present.
Good evening. Good evening. For the record, John Brescher, Chair of the Town Government Study Committee. So I think my purpose for the board tonight is just to give you an update where we are. We are, I don't want to say we're done with the fact-finding phase by any stretch of the imagination, but I think we've come up with a list of topics for us to investigate, and we have delegated accordingly within our committee for us to research them further, reconvene, and then come up with sort of a consensus on opinions for these topics. And then we would hold public meetings, get public input, because frankly, as you know, if we have any grandiose ideas or radical changes, if we don't have public backing, they are going to go nowhere. I can tell you that, in my opinion, I think we have about three, let's call them tiers of suggestions at this point. One would be more akin to, say, the technical changes that you see in a town meeting every year in the zoning bylaw. Syntax changes, semantics, making sure the charter is up to date with Mass General Law. And we've been in contact with Lauren Goldberg at Town Council's office, and she's been an absolutely excellent resource thus far. The other sort of next tier of sort of ideas and topics that we've had to investigate thus far are what I'd call sort of more tangible goals. Ideas such as creating a licensing commission or a parking commission or a sewer commission, under the idea that these sort of mechanisms or sort of reclassification of responsibilities would help with the efficiency and format of the government. And I don't expect them to be especially controversial, frankly. But that being said, we do need to do further due diligence on this. And then the third category of sort of ideas that we're looking at would be the more grandiose and exciting ideas, for lack of a better term, whether it be representative town meeting or other changes to the charter that would be more significant. My best guess at that point would be that for such significant changes, that our committee is likely going to do two things. One would be, as I said, with the tangible goals and the syntax changes, that we can probably put together as actual warrant articles for town meeting of 2020, or annual town meeting of 2020. For something more significant, whatever the committee winds up deciding, I think what we would wind up doing is presenting them to the select board as topics to sort of further investigate. I mean, even representative town meeting, there's momentum after, let's call it every November and every April after the town meeting, and say, oh well, there may be a need to change it. An example like that, again, I'm just sort of picking on representative town meeting because it's easy to do. Something like that, as well-intentioned as our committee is, and at the same time we're 7 volunteers, something as significant, as important as that, we'd probably suggest that, hey, look, if the select board thinks this is a good idea, and we want to bring it to the voters to say it's a good idea, we need to do way more due diligence, hire consultants, whole other towns, have his own committee to investigate it. But that is getting way down the path. I'm not entirely sure where we are with that. Ideally, we will meet before the end of the year and then continue to meet monthly, bi-monthly throughout the course of 2019 and hold public forums both, let's call it off-season, for lack of a better term, try to get people there, as well as holding them in the summer to make sure that we get summer residents' inputs on these things. Because although they may not be able to vote at town meeting, they still utilize a lot of the services for the town, and their input can be quite valuable. So that's where we are for the time being. And I believe we're down 1 committee member, so if you get any applications for number 7, or I'll put it out to the universe, if anyone wants to join, we're not that bad of a group.
Great.
Any questions?
No, thank you. Thank you for your work.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you. I like the tiers, how you're setting up there. It makes sense. Easy to understand.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Should we post it up again on the website or something that we're sure to member?
It's on the website.
Okay. Just checking.
The next item is a recommendation regarding hazardous waste commercial and residential fees. The Public Works Director and I have been talking about this off and on a bit since a member of the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board came in and talked about the possibility or the suggestion of perhaps the town accepting hazardous waste daily, and that is not a feasible option, but we have some other thoughts about it. Rob's going to review.
Good evening. So the goal here really is to remove hazardous waste, hazardous materials from Nantucket, period. End of story. Right now, the program is accessible to both homeowners and commercial businesses. Right now, we run 6 events annually, which allows convenience for people that are regularly disposing limited quantities from their property. As we've seen over the course of the past couple of years, there's been at least one substantial incident with large quantity of, and it wasn't that large of a quantity, but enough quantity of material introduced into the sewer system that caused some major disruption to the Sconset treatment plant. That forced us to look at our process in more detail, and it just differently than we had already been looking at the hazardous material collection process. And so it reminded us to go back and work with our partners at DEP to understand better the regulations and what businesses are currently required to do under the law, under the regulations, when they generate ignitable, corrosive, reactive, toxic, and other specifically listed products. And the laws are very specific. Any of those wastes require them to be properly disposed of, identified, managed properly, and then tracked. So even small generators need to register, businesses have to register with the state. We're not sure, because that's not necessarily our purview. We're not sure if to what degree commercial entities here on the island are registering with DEP to track and report their activities. But the law states that there's stipulations about what determines your generator factor from a very small quantity generator, small, large. There's 3 separate categories. And there's some stipulations there that the very small quantity generators still must register.
Who enforces that? Who, like, if it's not your responsibility or the town, is it within the town or is
Well,
it
it's Mass DEP. Ultimately, it's a state regulation, so it would fall under their purview.
And have they ever been out here or done anything toward it?
Generally, whenever we see DEP, it's because of a spill that's
Something's
been
went
reported.
wrong, yeah.
Something's happened, and they've been called out here to sort of get a handle on it. It's their jurisdiction, so they take over there.
Rob, is it common on the mainland for the DEP to show up at like a bigger development looking at hazardous? I mean, I understand why they're not
Again,
here all the time.
so there's, I believe the fire department has some jurisdictions with regard to storage of certain materials that are flammable and that sort of. So there's sort of some overlapping with that. The fire chief would be able to speak better to that specifically. I know for our own activities at Public Works, we register with the state. We have processes in place to properly handle, store materials, and dispose of them, as well as placard things, provide education and resources on site. So not just employees, but people that are visiting, officials that are visiting can have a resource to pull out to understand what materials are actually stored in those facilities. So again, that's sort of the expectation under the regulation.
Sorry, Rob, does Mass DEP have any oversight over retailers in any way? So the businesses selling the paint to other businesses?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Not sure.
So from our end, again, our goal is to provide homeowners, really, this is where the household hazardous waste collection days sort of generated from, because homeowners are exempt from the laws. You know, they're not considered commercial generators. So therefore, for a very long time, they were never scrutinized. And they, like I said, they're not scrutinized now through DEP. So these events allow the same exact product that can be used commercially, can be purchased from that same retailer, can be picked up by you and I as a homeowner, stored, properly or improperly in a home or a garage or something, and somehow be either improperly or illegally disposed of, and that could have some kind of negative effect on the environment. So the goal here is to collect that stuff, provide people a very easy, accessible way to do this. I can only look at the examples I've seen back from Central Mass. Most communities will have one, maybe two of these events throughout the year. The island has 6, which I think is quite appropriate. Just about every other month, you can have a place to bring this stuff and take care of it and get it off the island. So the nice thing about that is it comes together on one day to a specific location to properly trained employees of our off-island vendor. All the material is collected and packaged properly for transport and is summarily removed from the island same day. The proposal that came before us a month ago or so suggested that maybe DPW or the landfill vendor should be open basically any day that we're open to accept these materials. So we'll get into that in a little bit, but let me finish up my slides here. So we have the staff. Our staff supports the vendors. Our vendor right now is Clean Harbors. These events that run 6 times a year are 9 to 1 on a Saturday. We have, right now, residents are free, and really that has been the focus of our program. Commercial businesses are certainly allowed and encouraged. Currently, they pay $30 for the first quarter load, 1 to 3 gallons, $36 for the 4 to 10 gallons, $60 for a full 11 to 25 gallons. And if you remember, probably 6 months ago, came before you and said, this is following the incident in Sconset. The commercial businesses only had 1 hour from noon to 1 during that normally scheduled 9 to 1 time frame. And we said, hey, let's loosen it up. They should be allowed to come anytime during that time frame. It does pose some challenges to our vendor to handle commercial larger loads mixed in with the residential loads because they go slower. But they're able to handle it, and they've been able to do that.
Can these businesses that are like a large painting company, can they contract direct with Clean Harbors or with Safety Clean?
They definitely can, yes. We've been contacted from at least 2 that I can remember this fall about, hey, can we just drop off 500 gallons of waste oil to the DPW tonight for who's coming tomorrow to take it away? Absolutely not. We're not going to do that. That's just not the way this whole system works, and we're not going to take that risk on.
But they can go to them and pick
they
it
could,
up.
yes, yeah, and then they do.
But to that point, because when you have an average of 4.2 and you come 6 times a year, that's 24 commercial, entities. So where I mean, and I made the assumption, maybe erroneously, that a lot of this is generated by painting contractors. I don't know if that's true or not.
I would say most of what I see coming through was paint.
So where are these folks, getting rid of these hazardous materials if they're not coming to this 6 times a year event?
I can't speak specifically to those, but I mean,
I'm
there's
just
other
thinking from
opportunities. I believe.
I think a lot of them leave them with the residents. When they're done, a lot of times you'll look in your garage or you'll look wherever it's in your cellar. The ones that are empty, they can throw out.
Right. No, if they're doing a renovation, like I'm talking about buildings. I mean, new houses, and I don't think they'd leave them in the garage of a new construction. But I'm concerned more from an environmental standpoint.
Sure. I would say that most of the commercial painters that I know will use a product from one job on the next where they can, unless the customer's requesting a completely different color or something. But if they can use normal base colors from job to job, they're just going to continue to use it until it's empty, toss the can. So we're talking about...
So they don't generate a lot of, you're saying? It may not...
Again, I can't speak to everyone here on the island. What I can say is that right now, the numbers that we're seeing, the commercial participants are very low, right? 4.2 per event compared to the 150, which is really consistent with our residential participants. And you would think, again, this is, my off-island experience, after a period of time, we would sort of catch up and you would see participation or the amount we collect sort of drop off. And we're not seeing that. But again, we're also in a pretty consistent building boom, whether that is combination of commercial entities leaving products behind at residences to then have the residents handle their waste for them. I don't know where that's all coming from.
Is it some businesses avoiding the charge, potentially?
I'm sorry?
In terms of it being a resident versus a business, is some of that possibly businesses that are avoiding? They're coming in as residents.
It's possible.
Basically.
Sure.
How is the cost per event tied to volume? If we make it free and we triple the number of commercial participants, does that impact the volume or the cost per event?
It would handle the. It would impact the cost. Yes. I would say we could make the argument that the cost to the island specifically and to the environment by not acting and not encouraging and providing at least a reasonable level of service. I think we're sort of even at or above a reasonable level of service currently. Anything we do from here, including this proposal tonight, I think is sort of the right thing to do. But at not a severe cost.
And my question was more, how do we pay for it? As in, do we need to allocate more money than we're anticipating for this? Or how do we figure out how much money to allocate as opposed to it wouldn't be worth?
I mean, right now it comes out of the Public Works budget. Certainly if we see a tripling of the cost, we'd be looking at making adjustments within the budget.
Okay.
Again, I think the trade-off is, particularly with the single source aquifer, not anything we can do, but a lot of what we can do makes a lot of sense.
I would triple your budget just to take care of
Sure.
this if I had to.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Good thing I don't. No, I agree.
So tonight, my suggested change would be to remove the cost for commercial businesses and allow them to toss for free to encourage more participation.
I'll make that as a motion.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
They're here for 4 hours and you've got 159, interactions. That's pretty busy. I personally would like to have them come. I mean, it's short money, $9,000 on my view. I'd like to have them, see them come a couple more times a year, like even especially like August. So that's just my.
All right. I sort of accomplished my goal for the night, but I wanted to add to that one last thing here. We have a suggestion here with regard to protection from development activities. And I did have an opportunity to speak to the planning board for the first time Monday evening. And as part of a follow-up to one of the questions that they raised was this, that it's possible that the Plus group could require builders for each building permit to supply a pollution prevention plan, which ultimately would list and identify specific hazardous wastes and frankly all wastes to be generated for each project, so that they could at least raise awareness of how much is actually being generated and where it's really going.
So how do we get that done? Is that an administrative decision, or is that a part of our contract with Plus? I'd ask Libby.
We can certainly discuss it with them. It is definitely an increase in work effort and workload, but we can figure out what it would take to do that.
I don't know what the rest. I mean, I'd make a motion that we ask town administration to have a conversation with Plus and encourage them to figure out a way to do what you just said. This paragraph right here.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thanks.
And lastly, just to sort of follow up on the response to the Shellfish Advisory Board. Again, I think their heart's in the right place, and they're looking for protection to the environment, specifically to the shellfish. Here, getting back to the complexities of allowing daily collection at our facilities, currently, neither the Waste Options Nantucket folks nor DPW staff or our facilities are appropriate for safe collection, storage, or management of hazardous materials from residents and commercial entities on a daily basis. We have certainly employees that are trained to order, manage, collect, and dispose of our own wastes properly, but we do not have facilities that can manage what we can anticipate coming to us, number one, and to a volume that we wouldn't have a way to plan a facility to support. And it's very concerning to me to sort of centralize all of this material into one location where there could be some kind of catastrophic release to the environment that would then be on the town's, under the town's responsibility to then clean up. That all being said, this system works really well because it's a one-day activity. Everyone comes together at one location, flurry of activity, and then it's all gone. So for those reasons, I would support keeping and even if we go with more frequent events, this is the way to go.
Thanks, Rob. Jim, would you, your suggestion of we'd like to maybe see one, or I think you said 2 more days. Do you want Rob or anybody to come back with what days?
I just think it's a
think
encourage.
appropriate?
I think I just encourage him. I don't know if you want a motion to that event to that.
That's why I didn't know if you wanted to just encourage or if you wanted to.
Well, I don't know if it should be 1 or 2. I mean, I'll leave that up to you.
Okay.
But I think that, I mean,
We are tracking it very closely.
The stormwater pollution prevention plan. I mean, this is, we were trying to conjecture on, are we getting, how much of the stuff are we getting? Well, I think this is going to be really enlightening to really talk about the volume that's being created, and then we'll have a measure of this the hazardous material collection to see how effective it is in getting the stuff that they're generating. So I think it's great.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we're on to second part of our public hearings. So we're going to do these one at a time, I believe, right? Is that correct? We're going to open up the first one in public hearing to consider the appeal of Christopher and Elizabeth McCausland and Peter and Bonnie McCausland of Historic District Commission approval of the COA number 70858.
Stephen Cohen for the appellate, Mr. Chairman and board. I know the board doesn't love its role as these appeals, and I'll try to be as brief and on topic as possible. I am generally in front of you advocating for the rights of appellants, and I find myself this time in the opposite position, but I still feel very comfortable with this position. In this particular case, we have a garage that is in front of a house on Lincoln Circle. I think if you close your eyes and I ask to say the words Lincoln Circle House, all of you are going to picture this property. This is, I think, at 9 Lincoln Circle, the most iconic house on that historic road at the corner of Cobblestone Hill and Lincoln Circle. It is, a great piece of architecture and history. And the garage application was approved by the HDC on the consent agenda. I advocated very strongly for the consent agenda. I think it's fantastic. It gets 20, 30, 40 applications a week approved with very little effort, and the HDC does a great job with it. But every once in a while, something slips onto the consent agenda that shouldn't have, and I think that that's what we have here. This garage came to the board with a comment from the Historic Structures Advisory Committee suggesting that they wanted to know more about the age of it and the history of it, and that it was potentially something that was important to the streetscape, not just in its isolation, but in the greater scheme of things. The project was then, the garage was then put on the consent agenda by the staff and approved in that pot of however many items were approved that night. Later on in the meeting, when the pool application that we'll discuss a little later came up, the members were surprised to learn that they had already approved the garage. So I think that this is a extremely good example of an arbitrary and capricious decision where a decision was made without the board necessarily understanding what was happening and without the board following its own general policies. And by those policies, I mean two things. One is that this was a historic structure in a historic neighborhood in a historic streetscape, and generally those are not approved on the consent agenda. And also that when a project is filed in which there are multiple aspects of the project, that they are reviewed together. You don't have approvals done on consent, or you don't have approvals done piecemeal. The HDC generally has those tracked together so that it can see how the project develops. So I think in this particular case, there was an efficiency that was put in place that resulted in an arbitrary and capricious decision that should be remanded back to the board for further consideration, consistent with the standards that the board generally uses for historic structures and historic locations in which there are multiple aspects of the project on different applications. And that's my request to you, that you remand in that case. I know that Attorney Alger, who's here for the property owner, has submitted a letter that says that she's actually willing to abandon that permit because they have a later permit, a certificate of appropriateness, that deals with the change to that design. I would suggest that this it is highly questionable whether or not a building permit can be issued on a COA that is just for a revision if the underlying permit on which that revision is based is potentially not approved or on appeal. So I think that we need to not just allow her to abandon this permit, and then it needs to go back to the board for formal approval or denial based on its merits. And then I would suggest that the other application, which is really just a minor tweak to this, is at risk if that doesn't happen. Thank you.
Okay, next we'll go to the HDC, and then we'll have rebuttals, and then we'll open it up for a public comment.
John Hedden, Land Use Specialist, Town of Nantucket, on behalf of the HDC. Number one, the whole concept of bulking these applications together, in this case, moving a garage to have a pool. They're separate applications. They receive separate building applications. This garage move could have come in this year and been approved, and we could have seen a proposal for a pool next year. So things are separate. The whole concept of demoing a house and wanting to see what the building is going to be that replaces it makes no sense, because they could demo the building and run out of money and not build the new building. So tracking applications that way, it just doesn't work in reality. Number two, the garage is just being moved on the site on the property. So a small wing of the building is being demolished, and they're adding 2 windows to fill in with that, which is very in keeping with the garage itself, the main mass of the building. Relocating it up by the street. I don't know if we can go through the slides, but it'll show, I believe it's about 8 of the other properties have a garage, some of which are older as well, right up on the street. So the precedent for garages right up on the street has been made, and this is pretty much the only one that's not right up on the street. So it's not inappropriate for the neighborhood in any regard. As of now, I would say those are my comments.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Has the board ever made a motion to reconsider an application that was heard on consent? Because that's within their rights.
They can certainly reopen applications, yeah.
And they did not. No one attempted to do that in this case.
I would have to go back and look at the minutes. I don't believe so, though. No.
But they're aware that that's within their right to
that can
to
happen.
reopen,
Yeah.
to reconsider that based on
Correct. One of the
information that
voting
was
members on
later
it could have
in the
made a
meeting.
motion to reopen that application, certainly.
Is the garage itself historical?
It's from 1950. So I want to reiterate, it's not being demolished. Just the part of the wing of the garage is being demoed. But as you know, relocating structures, even historic structures on Nantucket, is something that happens all the time. So this isn't something we've never seen before that's abnormal.
Can you also explain a bit about the 2 different applications, the 70858 COA, and then there's another one? I don't fully understand. It sounded as if it was an application for the exact same thing and they're just abandoning the old one, but
Correct. So they're making a revision to the previously approved certificate. So, and that revision was to relocate the building again, I believe 4 feet to the east, I think it would be. So in that case, a revision to a previous certificate supersedes that previous approval. So you could still file an HDC approval for a building application on the most recent approval. So.
And even if it's under appeal?
That's something I'm not familiar with, to be honest. So I'd need more guidance on that, to be honest. But I don't see why anything would hold you up from applying for anything at any time. So.
Thank you. Any rebuttals?
Sure, I'll be brief. It's interesting to hear Mr. Hedden say that they don't, that there's no point in bulking these grouping these applications together, because it's actually the process that they do for the whole agenda every week, day in and day out. That's their process. I actually disagree with it, but it's their process. The idea that you don't have to apply together is true, but once you do, they're generally considered altogether. I think Rita's question is excellent. You know, how old is the building? That's what the Historic Structures Advisory Committee asked that the board collect more information before approving this application, and that information was not collected or reviewed before the consent agenda was voted on. I think that this is a historic structure in a historic area, in a historic streetscape, and it deserves a better review than was applied for. I also think it's extremely significant that the second certificate of appropriateness is not an independent application and approval of the second design, location, and whatever. It is merely an application to make a location change and some window changes to the existing permit. So if it had been a freestanding application, I think it would supersede the other one. But it is merely a tack-on amendment to the original one. I think they ride together. And people can agree or disagree on that, and we'll let a court figure it out. No one in this room gets to really make that decision as to how that legally works. I'm just telling you what my position is on it. So I think that this garage deserved more of really any review, and that this board should tell the HDC that historic structures should not be reviewed on the consent agenda in historic areas, and this should have had a hearing. Thank you.
You ready for any questions, comments from the board before we go to public? Okay, we'll open this up to the public.
Hi, Sarah Alger. I represent Nantucket Point of View LLC, the owner of this subject property. First of all, I want to say that I disagree pretty much with everything Mr. Cohen said. The applications are often handled separately, depends when you file them. These happen to be on the same agenda, but there's no reason why they couldn't be handled separately. Secondly, there was nothing inappropriate about handling this first application on consent. But that being said, the second application, I'm going to call the first application that resulted in the COA that's under appeal here, Garage 1. The second application, which is Garage 2, was in fact a separate application, and it received a complete full hearing, as Mr. Cohen knows because he was present at the hearing. All of the historical information regarding the house was presented. We had a full discussion about the house. We had a full discussion about the move. The board took into consideration the comments of the Historic Structures Advisory Board. They approved on a 4-to-1 vote the relocation of the garage in a completely different location in Garage 2 than was approved in Garage 1. All of the information was taken in. There was a full discussion. There was even a discussion of the fact that it was a separate, distinct, and new application that's reflected in the minutes. And the board made, again, a decision based upon the precedent, based upon the neighborhood, based upon the information that was submitted about the house in Garage 2, its age, and its location. So we are prepared. It's helpful. We're prepared to abandon Garage 1 and proceed solely on Garage 2. We're also happy to have you affirm Garage 1 and let us go forward on Garage 2, which also was not appealed, so that Garage 2 application stands on its own. That COA that was issued is a valid COA, and we'd be within our rights to go ahead and apply for a permit under it. It's a final and binding decision of the board. And I guess that's what I have to say about Garage 1 and 2.
Any questions from the board? Clarifications? Thank you.
I would ask town council to maybe respond to the last comment from the applicant's attorney about options we might have, because I didn't really see it that we did.
Yeah,
but.
using the same language that Attorney Alger used, Garage 2 actually is not before you.
Right,
That appeal was rejected as not timely.
Okay.
So
we just have Garage 1 before us.
Right.
Okay.
You have
Thank
Garage
you.
1.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
So, sorry, there was an appeal on Garage 2, but it wasn't submitted in time?
Yes, Erica Mooney had notified the appellant that was not timely, but the other appeals were timely, the Garage 1 and the pool appeal.
Okay.
So I guess I have a kind of a question then. So are we worried about if Garage 2 has a garage slightly moved, but it's a valid permit, then why are we even talking about garage one?
It would seem to be moot, but I would ask,
I guess that's-
the property owner's counsel would know more about that than I would.
Yeah, it's my feeling that we would like to abandon garage one and proceed solely on garage two, thereby mooting the appeal of garage one. As far as, I wanted to just mention, Mr. Cohen had mentioned remanding. I don't believe that that is within the scope of this board's authority at this point. I think your decision-making here is to either affirm the decision that was made by the HDC or to overturn the decision that was made by the HDC based on that decision being either arbitrary, capricious, or outside of the board's authority. And I don't think in this case you can find that happened. This decision was well within the authority of the board and then ended up being essentially affirmed by the decision in Garage 2. But regardless, we're happy to file a letter reserving our rights to act under Garage 2 and mooting the appeal on Garage 1.
I have a quick question for town council. It's my understanding that no new information can be brought forth during this. So I didn't see a lot about Garage 2 in the packet. So can we even be talking about Garage 2 during this appeal?
Not really. It's time barred. So
I'm just trying to go with the guidelines of this appeal.
Right. So
appeal
guidelines
process.
for this appeal would really be garage. First of all, regardless of what the property owner wants to do about Garage 1 decision, I mean, they don't have the ability to moot the appeal. So you have an appeal before you on that. The applicant, the original applicant is certainly able to, express however they want, but they don't intend to act on that certificate of appropriateness. And really, technically, you don't have the ability to deny an appeal as moot under the, the standards that are provided in the HDC Act. So what you're really looking at here are the performance standards that apply to the first application on Garage 1, and whether that decision was arbitrary and capricious. The issue about the consent agenda, I don't know if Select Board Member Holgate's comment about reconsideration was implying this, but what I take from that question is, so if it's on the consent agenda and they approve it, and later they find out, oh, gee, we didn't really know what we were approving at the time, they could always reconsider. They could have reconsidered that. So that goes to, the issue of whether or not they knew what they were approving when the pool came before them. In other words, they were always free to reconsider that consent agenda vote if they found that there was some missing information that then got presented to them later. They did not do that in this case. So they never moved to reconsider that original Garage 1 decision. So if you look at unless the appellant and the applicant were able to agree that the appeal of Garage 1 is moot, you really have to act on that. And really the way you look at these is whether or not you want to vote to uphold the appeal or vote to deny the appeal for failure to satisfy the burden of proof. So what you're looking at here is whether that decision of the commission was arbitrary and capricious, which in turn means that there's no reasonable grounds that a reasonable person would deem necessary to support that decision. And so you're looking at issues under their performance standard. They're looking at general design, arrangement, texture, material, and color of the building or structure in question, the location on the lot, and the relation of such factors to similar features of buildings and structures in the immediate surroundings, and the position of such building or structure in relation to the street or public way and to other buildings and structures. And so that was the performance standard that the commission applied to this application. If you find that there's no reasonable grounds that could have supported their decision under this performance standard, then that would be grounds to uphold the appeal. But I would just remind the board that you are not to substitute your judgment for that of the commission, just whether to determine whether there were no reasonable grounds that would support that decision. Might have been more than you asked for, but hopefully that answered some of it.
Rita?
George, sorry, I do have one more question. In this scenario where they have a COA that they can act on, if we were to uphold the appeal, what would that actually mean in practice?
Right, I suppose you could uphold if you upheld the appeal and you vacated the certificate, then that would be a decision that you made. Query whether that's, worth anybody's time if the applicant doesn't intend to go forward on that certificate anyway.
Well, so in this particular scenario, because there's an approved COA, that what we do here doesn't have the same impact that it would if there wasn't that other application.
With what the applicant is representing, that they don't intend to go forward on that anyway. But that one thing that I'm not that comfortable about taking that type of an approach is you're not really applying the standard that's imposed upon you in hearing these appeals. Mm-hmm. You're looking at them, if it's not time barred, you're kind of judging whether or not that decision at issue was arbitrary and capricious.
Right.
I think just for my own purposes, not that it's necessarily a red herring, but I'm just going to rely on town council's earlier comment that we should consider only garage 1, and I'm going to try to exclude from my head anything related to garage 2.
The only reason I think it is still relevant is because the COA is mentioned in the sort of the evidence that was given to us. It didn't say garage 2, but it did say a second COA. So for me, I didn't understand what that meant.
Hello, my name is Michael May. I'm with the Nantucket Preservation Trust, and I did write a letter of support of the appeal. We are really concerned about this building. It's one of the finest examples of colonial revival architecture on the island, and we really feel that maybe the application was rushed. For full disclosure, I'm also a member of the Historic Advisory Committee for the HDC. And I was there the day we reviewed this, and we felt that the application was incomplete. So I was concerned when I learned after the fact that it was on the consent agenda, because usually if we have a concern, they don't put it on the consent agenda. I think one thing that we felt at the Historic Structures, and I'll just speak for myself, is that we didn't have pictures of the garage. We didn't have the date it was constructed. At the time, we know now it's 1948, just from historic research that we have done. But we just didn't have that information, so we felt we couldn't have a complete, a good review of the project. And we did note on our form that it was an incomplete application. So we really think the idea of stepping back and revisiting this is a very good idea, and we would encourage the select board to advise that. Thank you.
Thank you. Quick question for our board and George. Was what Mr. May just mentioned, was that in our packet that they said? Maybe I just missed it. That was in there?
It might be in yours. I didn't see it. I don't have it.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it was.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it was.
I just want to make sure we can discuss
It
that.
was handwritten. I think it was only a couple lines.
Okay. Can we go? Sorry. Did you want to?
It's page 91.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to make a clarification. So for this appeal, the first, which is the Garage 1, the first application they filed, was not reviewed by Historic Structures Advisory Board the first time. The second application was revised by Historic Structures Advisory Board. And we had learned of the appeal of the first one, so when the second one came in, we sent the pool and the garage to Historic Structures Advisory Boards for their comments. So.
Right. So that gets tricky for me because now we're talking about garage 2 again.
Yeah.
That, I just want to make that clear.
Okay.
Okay, simple clarification. Historic Structures Advisory Board did not review the first application. It's outside the core district. I should have considered it. Yes, definitely a historic structure they could have reviewed.
So,
Another question for you. Also, at that first hearing, when they expressed concerns when the pool came up, they could have reopened the first application and they could have sent it to Historic Structures Advisory Board.
Correct.
It's an advisory board of the HDC, and the HDC always has the authority to send it out for more information. And they did not do that.
Correct, absolutely. And that does happen on a definite frequent basis. And often Historic Structures requests that any revisions made to any application be represented to them. So,
my name is Mark Avery. I was the agent who submitted for the owners these garage plans. And one of the reasons that it seemed completely appropriate to go on to a consent agenda as it was that we were not intending in any way to damage or harm the historic structure. The house, certainly not. The house that everyone's talking about as an architectural treasure, there are no changes proposed to that whatsoever. This was a garage building that actually blocked part of the view of the house, which we intended to move approximately 40 feet on the lot, just simply put it in a different place. In part to screen a new pool proposal, but also it is in keeping with the whole site plan that way. So we weren't destroying anything except a later wing to the garage, which we were going to remove, make it from a 3-bay garage to a 2-bay garage again, as it was when it was originally built. So for the HDC to have decided to put it on the consent agenda seemed completely appropriate because we weren't doing any harm to any of the structures, just simply moving it on the site in a way that is very commonplace in the neighborhood. So, thanks.
thank you. Any other comments from the public before we close it?
So just very briefly, I don't ask you to reconsider whether or not the HDC made the right decision. I don't ask you to reconsider whether or not the HDC passed on its ability to have cured its decision. I don't ask you to look at a garage 2, which may or may not have been a more thorough process. Strictly looking at the vote that was taken, I would assert, one, it did not consider, it wasn't sent, as Mr. Hedden said, it wasn't sent to the Historic Structures Advisory Committee, despite being a historic building in a historic neighborhood and a historic streetscape. And it is clear from the record that the HDC did not have a clear understanding that it had just taken this vote on this building on this property later in the meeting. I think it is clearly, not following process and not an arbitrary and capricious decision. Whether or not it's the right decision is not before you, just whether or not that process was followed and whether or not there's a proper basis for it. And I would ask you to uphold the appeal.
I would just like to address one thing that Mr. Cohen said. There's nothing in the record to indicate that the HDC didn't know what it was doing when it voted to approve Garage 1. That there's just absolutely nothing in the record or in the file or anywhere that supports Mr. Cohen's statement that the HDC did not know what it was doing when it approved Garage 1. I would assert that it absolutely did. Things are put on the consent agenda with the approval and review of the chair. The other members have an opportunity to review it. They have an opportunity to have things pulled out. They had an opportunity to ask for reconsideration. That didn't happen. It was approved. And I would ask you to uphold the decision of the HDC.
Okay, if there's not anything new, I think maybe The board is okay. We can close the public hearing and ask questions with town council if we need to. Is that okay? All right, we'll close the public hearing. The board can talk amongst ourselves or town council.
I don't have any questions.
I have one question for town council. Because the video of the meeting wasn't in our packet, can we talk about that? Is that part of the discussion? Let's say I went and watched the recording of that whole HEC meeting. Is that part of the discussion? My opinion on
Yeah,
it?
it could be part of the record. Is it part of the record before you? That
I'm just saying there was no, I'm getting really technical, there was no link to the video in our packet, so can I speak on it?
I think you can. I would give the appellant the right to, respond to it. You've closed the hearing at this point, and so if you introduce new material now, it's really not fair to the appellant to close the hearing.
Okay, well, if you consider it new material, then I
unless
won't bring it up. If you consider it new.
Oh, he doesn't object anyway, so.
Okay.
The only thing I would remind you to is anything relevant in terms of the grounds for the decision. Mr. Hedden talked about that at the beginning of his presentation, what their reasoning was for, approving the certificate. And I would just remind the board that that's the type of thing you're looking for. Is there any evidence on the record that a reasonable mind would deem necessary to support the approval?
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah.
I'd make a motion to deny the appeal on the basis for failure to meet the burden of proof that this action was arbitrary and capricious on the part of the board of the HDC.
Second.
Any discussion? Ready for a vote? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Rita, no.
Okay. Passes 4-1. Rita did not approve it. Right, thank you. Moving on to number 2. Same property. This is for a pool. The COA of 71235.
Mr. Chairman, I think that this pool is an atrocity and a scar on one of the most historic areas and most visible areas of Nantucket, and that the HDC did not properly consider alternative locations and should have required the applicant to consider the side of the house or the back of the house for this pool. I think the HDC members felt legally boxed in a way that was a misunderstanding of the law and precedent, and should have sought legal counsel on those issues before feeling trapped in by them. And I think that the HDC misapplied the concept of visibility here. They essentially said that you could put a pool in front of this iconic structure if you simply have a fence in front of it. If that's true, you can put a pool anywhere, which I am happy to take and basically throw back at you for the next 30 years I'm going to be here doing this. But I hope not. I think that this property, this historic structure, deserves to be treated better than to have a pool in front of it. And I will tell you, and you probably know this, I love pools. I have a pool. I advocate for people to have the right to have a pool, but not here, not in this way. And I'm not asking you to determine that the HDC made a decision that's not asking you to substitute your judgment for the HDC about whether or not this was a good decision or a bad decision. I'm asking you to suggest that the HDC should have considered other options and should have determined legally whether or not they were required to do this in the way that they suggested during the hearings, that they felt forced into doing it, and also that they incorrectly applied the visibility standard during their consideration of it. So I strictly ask you to find that they have an arbitrary and capricious decision that should be overturned and should be sent back for further deliberation, not that for you to substitute your judgment that this was a good or bad decision, although I find it to be an abhorrent decision that is insulting to this structure and this neighborhood. And I also do want to repeat, just for the record, that my client has hired an appraiser to determine that there would be a substantial, my client's the direct abutter, a substantial negative impact to their property based on this pool being in the front yard of this historic structure, that it's such an atrocity that it would negatively impact the value of their property. And I only say that because it's part of the legal standard for on appeal, not that you care about it. I would ask you to uphold the appeal and require that the HCC not permit these kind of things. Thank you.
HTC?
John Hedden, Land Use Specialist, Town of Nantucket again, on behalf of the HDC. First off, I would disagree that you can put a pool anywhere on Nantucket with screening. This area, as you can see, is full of hedges. And if we go to our slide that shows 21 Lincoln Ave, there is a pool in the front yard that is screened by hedges. Sufficiently screened from visibility. I guess click on one of those. I'm sorry. In the meantime, I would say the commission reviewed this application at 3 different meetings, so it wasn't that they didn't consider other options for approving this pool in the location that it was approved in. As I said, if we can find that slide, sorry. Yeah, I think. Yep, right there. So there's a pool behind those hedges, behind that white shelled driveway that you cannot see from the street. So I think to say that the commission acted arbitrary or capricious on approving a pool that's in the front side area of the property of the house, you just can't come to grounds to do so based on this approval that was approved 4 years ago unanimously on a house that's actually older than the locus that we're talking about. So that house actually shows up as a cottage in the 1897 Sanborn maps. It still has the same footprint as the cottage, which leads me to believe it was just built up. So those things considered, I don't think this pool is going to be visible at all from the street, and therefore I think that removes it from any jurisdiction of the HDC.
John, did the HDC look at this as part of their decision making with surrounding and other pools?
Yes, the applicant did provide pictures of pools in the area, other pools in the area, and I believe that one was their picture. I had submitted another picture that was actually closer up, and later on in the year, that's September, so mine was taken in late November, and it shows that it's still not visible. So yes, the applicant did provide information such as that.
Go ahead, Rita.
2 questions, John. One, with 21 Lincoln Circle being historical, in the minutes it was interesting that the age of the house was never brought up when the pool was discussed. Is that normal? Is it just sort of people know that it's historical?
Typically, I mean, the age of a structure is, this is obviously what we deem a hardscape application, the pool. So definitely it's incorporated in the property, but hopefully definitely separate from the architecture of the main house. So you kind of can take them sometimes hand in hand based on the property. I don't know that this particular property was really greatly discussed as far as the age of it. It was just more of a representation of the visibility of that structure. So as stated right from the beginning, closing your eyes, everyone knows the former Hilfiger property. Or should they remove the aqua green shutters that are on the front that don't seem too in keeping with that building. But yeah, it went to 3 meetings. The pool started at 40 feet by 16, was reduced to 36 by 16. There was hedging area and fencing that was brought in closer towards the pool area as you're looking down the driveway to narrow the corridor view into the property. More planting plans were submitted by the applicant. So over the course of the 3 meetings, there was a lot of different material that was presented for their determination.
I have one more question. I'm just trying to understand what would sort of be, I think it would be considered maybe best practice when, and Dawn, maybe at a later date, you might be able to help, when HTC is considering a property like this and they refer to another property, is that, it seems that there would be some concern, this idea again of creep or setting a precedent. So they refer back to a historical property for something like a pool that wouldn't be a historical feature and say, well, if it happened there, then we can do it here. It seems like that's what leads to the creep of, at some point we're going to have, I don't know, brick all the way up Main Street houses or white fences all the way up Main Street houses.
Yeah, I mean, certainly certain determinations can set a precedent, which is certainly a tough thing for the HDC, which needs to go into all their considerations for determinations on, how it's going to affect a neighborhood, really. In this case, it's the streetscape. It's part of a neighborhood. So, I mean, just lastly, the pool at 21 you can't see it. It's just not visible from Lincoln Circle. I mean, it's, in my opinion, odd to see such a big structure, such as a pool that's 36 by 16, that's not visible from the street and incorporated into a property such as this. But it's not visible, and that's, takes it away from HDC jurisdiction.
Okay, so that would be sort of common practice then, is even though the pool itself at 21 isn't historical, essentially using others that, comparing, rather than doing case by case, comparing to other properties in sort of accepting it as a precedent would be common.
Well,
I don't know if
are you getting at sort of whether pools should be in the yards of historic structures?
I'm trying to understand sort of the process of when the HDC looks at an application like this, sort of the argument that, well, it's over at 21. Is that?
I think it's more of whether it's in any way visible or detracting from the neighborhood. I can think of at least, off the top of my head, at least 3 others in this neighborhood that are on historic properties. I mean, they all have had, from what I remember, significant review of whether there was a building that screened it or very significant plantings that screened it to make them not visible. I mean, remember, they are a grade.
Yeah. So it really is more a matter, when they're comparing, it's a visibility as opposed to there's another historical building with a pool in front.
And if they make a mistake, they don't have to continue to make that mistake. The HDC, I think that's true. If they make a mistake and they realize it, they don't have to say, well, we made a mistake here, we just have to keep making it.
Right.
I mean, they have the ability to correct it in time. I mean, that's...
Yeah, and that's been said many times,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
oh, we did that, we shouldn't have done that, we're not going to do it again, in my experience.
And I think there's certain applications for kind of, I think, what you're getting at. If we move down into the old historic district off of Main Street or, an older street, and we're comparing houses next to each other, that might be a different style. Well, we wouldn't say, house A should now have 2/2 windows because house B has 2/2 windows, but it might be a completely different style of house, so that wouldn't make sense to fit that, that style of house and what would have been on there. Last I would say, as you know, the island is a place of leisure and summer people, and pools have obviously been on the rise tremendously the past couple of years, certainly, and this is part of it. And if the pool's not visible, it's not visible, and it's behind the relocated garage structure, and so.
How do you factor in? How does the HDC factor in visibility and impact to the adjacent property, or is that not a factor?
From the adjacent property?
Yeah, if the neighbor right next door.
That's not in their jurisdiction to comment on neighbors.
George, you have anything?
I just had a little bit to add about the question about precedent and really where it's relevant for them to consider other things going on in that neighborhood is only under that performance standard that I cited to you about the location on the lot and the relation of such features to similar features of buildings and structures in the immediate surroundings. And so that's what they're looking at there. They're not bound, and in fact, they shouldn't base their decision on, we allowed a pool over here, so we have to do it there. But if that particular structure makes sense in the context of the immediate surroundings, that is exactly what they should be applying here. Mm-hmm. The other thing that comes up for them, many people have complained, but it demonstrates not arbitrary and capricious decision making. They have building with Nantucket in mind, which they've published and made clear to the public is a design guideline that they go by. They haven't published formal regulations, but they have made it clear to applicants and anybody interested that they apply standards in building with Nantucket in mind. And the way building with Nantucket in mind kind of breaks it down is historically different neighborhoods. A particular neighborhood, it would be, just insane to have a pool in that neighborhood because of the setting and the historical context that you're dealing with. So that's also where the question comes up about if the age of a structure is relevant. It is relevant if you're looking at historical context, what this particular setting involves historically and what you want to allow in terms of exterior features in that area. So that's the only thing that I would add about that. I would say too, if it is a situation where the exterior feature of the structure is only visible from an adjoining private residence, that isn't within the HDC's jurisdiction. The only thing that is in their jurisdiction are features that are viewable from a publicly accessible area, like a traveled way, park, beach, anything like that. Not strictly from or solely from an abutting residence. That's important to note. And I don't know if Mr. Hedden was saying that this was allowed because it was not visible from a publicly viewable area, or if they found that it was appropriate. But definitely their jurisdiction does not extend to what may be visible only from an adjoining residence.
Anybody from the public?
Michael May, Nantucket Preservation Trust. I just, a couple of concerns I had was that in the winter, will it be visible when that privet hedge does lose some of its leaves? I think that no one has mentioned that. Also, if you look at the streetscape around Lincoln Circle, the one house that has the pool down is down at the other end. And I think there's a lot of open space, and I think we're setting a precedent that all those front yards are now going to probably have privet hedge and fences, and then they'll put a pool. So I think there's a danger of really changing the historic character of Lincoln Circle. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public?
Good evening. My name is Ken Berman. I'm a lawyer at Nutter, McLennan and Fish, and I am co-counsel with Sarah Alger, and we both represent Point of View LLC. First, just want to talk about the legal standard for this appeal and what the role is of the Board of Selectmen, as I'm sure you're familiar with, and it is that you can't really substitute your judgment for the judgment of the HDC. And the real issue on this appeal is, was the HDC within its discretion in issuing the certificate of appropriateness? If a member of the Board of Selectmen feels that if they were on the HDC, they wouldn't have granted it, that's really irrelevant. The real question is, could the HDC in its discretion have granted this certificate of appropriateness? And if so, the obligation of the Select Board is to affirm. Only if the Select Board concludes that no HDC could have possibly approved this application for a pool, only then can you vacate the decision of the HDC. There was a great deal of thought that went into the overall plan for the relocation of the garage and the location of the pool. And you're going to hear later from Julie Jordan, who did the landscaping and the layout and worked on the location of the pool, why the pool is being located, where it's being located, and what the benefits are to the property and to the neighborhood as a result. And then you'll hear from my co-counsel, Sarah Alger, who will also bring additional information to your attention about the process that the HDC used in coming to the conclusion that this was a perfectly appropriate use for the site and that the certificate of appropriateness should be granted. One of the things that hasn't been mentioned or hasn't been emphasized is that with the relocation of the garage to a position closer to the street, still behind the privet hedge, what that has the effect of doing is it exposes more of the house. The purpose of the relocation of the garage is to make way for the pool. The pool is not in the front yard, as Mr. Cohn has said. It's to the side. And you'll hear from Julie Jordan about why it is to the side and what the function of the side is in a historic property like this. But when all of this is said and done, what people will see from the driveway, which is really the only place that people can actually view into the property, what they're going to see is they will see more of the house. They won't see the pool. The reason that they won't see the pool is because of screening provided by the garage, which obscures two-thirds of what could possibly have been seen if there were no screening there. But two-thirds of the pool, the garage will be blocking two-thirds of the pool. There will be screening, of course, behind the garage, between the garage and the pool. But that screening is going to continue around the pool, and it is not going to come up more than 4 feet high. And the reason for that 4-foot limitation, which by the way was placed by the HDC wanted that 4-foot limitation, was so that it could enable somebody who's standing at the driveway to see more of the house, parts of the house that can't be seen right now because they're obscured by the garage. The visual impact of this pool is going to be nil because of the visual impact of the pool is going to be nil because of where the garage is and also because of the screening, and you'll hear more about the screening and the effectiveness of that screening. So when you consider the overall reasonableness of what the HDC did, I would ask that you consider that what the HDC did was, in fact, improve the viewscape for this particular property by approving the relocation of the garage, thereby opening up a view corridor to portions of the house that have not been seen by the street since 1950, I believe it was, when the garage was constructed. And the only other element to that, to improving the viewscape to the house, is that there is going to be a pool appropriately located, appropriately screened, that will not be viewable by anybody from the public because of the screening. What the Supreme Judicial Court said in Gumley, which is the case that governs this case, is talking about the HDC Act. It said, we think it confers on the Commission, the HDC, a substantial measure of discretionary power with respect to the appropriateness of exterior architectural features and congruity to historic aspects of the surroundings and the district. The provision for appeal to the board is not to be taken as transferring that discretionary power to the board, to the select board. So I'm going to turn it over now to Julie Jordan, and she can explain to you how all of these decisions were made with respect to the location of the garage and the pool and the impact on the neighborhood and the surrounding structures, which is what the HDC needed to take into consideration. The surrounding environment. And then Sarah Alger will then follow Julie Jordan. Thank you.
Okay. I have a quick question. George, is it okay for me to ask that we keep this in the process of the HDC, or can public comment just go on all the intricacies of the property? And I'm not really sure what I'm asking here.
I wasn't.
We're getting
sure.
away from the process of the HDC decision, and we're getting into the nitty gritty of where the pool is, what it looks like.
Right. It's not. It's you. If an appeal goes to Superior Court, it's a de novo review for the Superior Court. They'll take into account all the evidence. You're more looking at the record that was before the HDC and determining whether there is any reasonable grounds that would support that decision. The Gumley case, all that standard absolutely applies about the arbitrary and capricious test. But I think what you're asking is, do we have to go into this detailed evidentiary hearing, which you don't, clearly. It certainly, if you feel that it's relevant, it wouldn't be inappropriate for them to make that presentation to you.
Yeah, I just think we're getting a little out of what we're here to talk about. I'm not trying to stop you from speaking, Julie. Jim?
So, again, I appreciate counsel for the applicant's charge on what our role is, but I really listened to our counsel, which I think is pretty consistent with what you said. And I was confused too, because I heard an argument about why moving the garage provides more screening when, that's what earlier counsel said that's not for us to make a judgment about. It's really about whether the process was arbitrary and capricious. So as I said earlier in the last, I'm going to try to, in my own head, divorce that from my consideration.
Dawn?
I would agree. I don't think it's necessary for us to rehear all of the reasons that you designed it the way you did that the HDC heard. That's their job. It's our job to decide whether they acted in an arbitrary way.
Okay, well, if you don't want to hear from Julie, let me just say a few things just to wrap it up. I want to say, first of all, the HDC process was a process of 3 meetings and a viewing. Julie made, at all 3 meetings, an extensive presentation. All of the photographs that you have in your packet were presented and looked at. There were mock-ups done at the property at the request of the commission because they wanted to be so careful about the approval of this pool. We had a surveyor go out and stake the property so that the commission could actually go and visit the property and see exactly what would be visible from where. They came onto the property, they stood in the location of the pool, they saw the staking where the pool would go. They were able to see staking where the garage structure would be so that they could judge the pool based on where the garage would be. They put up stakes with burlap to approximate what the hedge would look like. It was in fact based upon that mock-up that the commission determined that the 6-foot high height was something that they weren't happy about, and that's why the plantings were requested to remain at 4 feet, because it kept open the view to the historic house. They were, I think, completely and thoroughly deliberate and careful and cautious in making this decision. They understood the importance of what they were doing. They looked at all of the pools in the neighborhood. They particularly spent time with the screening and visibility of this particular pool. They requested that and got changes to the plan that were made in the course of the 3 meetings. The pool was moved further away from the neighbor. The pool was reduced in size. The screening was increased. They had, in addition to the photographs, they had aerials, they had building department information from all the pools in the neighborhood. I think I heard Mr. Cohen say something about the HDC feeling boxed in or misunderstanding what their authority was. There's absolutely nothing in the record to support that statement. The board fully understood what it was doing, what it was considering. I don't believe they felt boxed in at all. I don't think the minutes reflect that. They made a decision. It was a 4-to-1 decision. It was well thought out. It was done after time at the property, changes being made to the plan, photographs, reading the Historic Structures Advisory Board comments, making their own judgment on those comments. I think there's even a comment in the record. One of the members said, we're looking at the historic nature of this property and we're taking that into consideration. So I think based on all of that, I would say that this board really should uphold the decision of the HDC. I see no grounds for finding that they were arbitrary or capricious or acting outside of their authority. Thank you.
I have a question that really has no bearing on our authority, but just for a point of information. Does the landscape plan screen this well from the neighbors?
Yes,
with
it
the
does.
fencing and
yes, and in fact,
and the planting plan.
The planting plan, I think, is the next. If you go up,
Yeah,
one
I know
more,
it's in there, but I just wanted
no get back.
that
It was the
statement.
one right after where the sheet we were on. Maybe not. Well, it's in the package, and yes, it does. There's significant. There's a row of columnar trees that goes along. In fact, I have a copy of it here, which I will just give you. This is not new information. This is out of the packet. It's the second sheet on this. No, that's a neighbor.
No, yeah, it was increased as they went along in the process.
I just
It
want-
started out with 3 trees, and then it ended up with.
We increased it as we, you know, at first it started with just 3 shade trees, and
Right.
then as the.
There it is.
And it said you moved it away from
Yeah, we
them
moved
a
it
bit.
away and we increased the amount of screening, and they're gonna be between 14 and 20 feet, depending on what's available. And they'll be tight to each other.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any other comments from the public? All right, we'll close, Mr. Cohen.
Sure. Just very briefly, I want to be extremely clear that my argument is that this decision was based inappropriately on an inaccurate understanding of how the precedent should be applied with the pools in the neighborhood, with an inaccurate understanding of how the wetland boundaries and zoning might apply as to whether they could or couldn't consider having the pool in other locations, and an inaccurate application of the visibility standard and whether or not there was truly sufficient and accurate and total blockage from the public way of this structure. I'm not asking you to substitute your judgment for the board. I think the board's judgment, the commission's judgment here was a bad decision, but I'm not asking you to reconsider it. I'm only asking you to assess it based on the things I just said and to determine that the commission acted without proper understanding of what it was doing and acted arbitrarily and capriciously, and not to have this abhorrent decision set a precedent that anyone can have a pool in the front yard of a historic structure if they put some hedges in. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll close the public hearing.
Can I ask one question to John before we?
Sure.
Hey, John, just real quick. Did the HDC consider the pools itself and determine that the pool in this location was appropriate, or did they look at it and say, it'll be screened and not seen?
Mr. Cohen was at the meetings, and he did bring to the commission's attention of proposing different locations, specifically along Cobble Hill.
Cobblestone, yeah.
Along that side of the property and there. I believe the commission felt that it would be visible, actually more visible if it was in placed in that location. So there were different considerations of the location of the pool.
Right. I guess what I'm asking, because I'm thinking about it from the perspective of the precedent of having these everywhere, You know, were the discussions of that by the board, or did they say, well, we can't see it? You know, or did they really say, okay, this is the precedent we're setting, and
No, there was certainly discussion. Commissioner Camp definitely brought that to the full commission's attention, that this would be, is definitely something that could set a major precedent for that neighborhood. I will say hedges are all over the place in that area. That's the plant of choice up there, and it sufficiently screens a lot of other yards and such things in that area. So with that planting, I feel it's appropriate. So.
Any other questions?
I'm ready to make a motion.
Yeah, I close the public hearing. You said another question.
So I make a motion that we deny the appeal for the failure to meet the burden of proof that this action was arbitrary and capricious, and the HDC did not fail, that the HDC did not follow their own regulations.
Second.
I closed it. Yep.
Discussion?
Yep, second.
I don't think that this was necessarily, I don't think it was arbitrary and capricious. I think it was discussed quite a bit. I think some of the process maybe was a little bit muddy with the other garage application. Just a comment, really, because it isn't in our purview, but I feel like, to my own professional detriment, this is a situation where I wish the HDC had more control. This is a property. I think we're losing a little bit of the sight of what we're trying, the point of the HDC, to preserve the historic experience, when we can detach all these different parts, the garage, the experience of the view shed of the 1950s garage in connection to the 1917 house. I just think, I think it's tragic that there's a pool on historical, I would call it an iconic property like this, but I don't think they were arbitrary and capricious.
and that
I think maybe that, I mean, we'll find out at town meeting. We have someone who wants to, abolish pools in a citizen article. So we've had a lot of conversations about pools in historic districts, and I don't know if it's the jurisdiction of the HDC to weigh in on should Nantucket have pools or not. Maybe that's part of our responsibility. I don't know, but it's an issue we have in the entire community.
That sort of the reason I was asking John the question is I think it is in their purview to say, look, imagine if the Historic Association wanted to put a huge pool in front of the oldest house. And I know that's hang on, Don, that sounds crazy, but it's in their purview to say no to that. It's in their purview to say no to this. They didn't choose to say no to this. And so, so that's the issue we're dealing with, and it's a high standard for us to overturn it. And I don't think that I can, even though I, agree wholeheartedly that it is a scar. And I think the more we do this in some of these areas, the more of a scar it will be. But at the same time, I don't think, because we're boxed in with how it is, I don't think that I can, I'll have to support the HCC in this. But I wish they had made a different decision. But I'm not allowed to, I'm not allowed to substitute that into this right now. So.
The HDC does have some limits in its abilities, just as, they can't go inside structures that we would love to see them go inside of and preserve. But something like the oldest house is individually significant, and they could absolutely say you can't plant hedges and put up a fence or a pool fence there.
Yeah,
Those are the things that are visible,
oldest
and
house,
they
is my
could
point.
say it there.
No, but I'm saying they could say it in a lot more places if they chose to, because that's that is in their charge.
There could be
Now, if
other
they don't
arguments.
choose to do that, that's a different issue. But they could absolutely say no hedges here, no pools, no this. This is a home out, pick the tea house out out in Pocomo. They could absolutely say it has to look like it's looked in that siting. That's what they're allowed to do. But a lot of times they don't choose to do that. In the interior, they you know, there's been talk about it for years. It was a hot issue when I was elected 8 years ago, but they haven't chose to bring those changes either. You know, we could be, they could bring those changes, and some of the people who are very vocal and have said they support that still don't bring those changes. You know, which I would support 100%, having more control of the really historic homes. But they haven't chose to bring those either. So it's a difficult situation, you know, so.
And, you know,
Any other discussion on the motion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. And Julie, sorry about that. I know you were here for a long night.
I would have addressed some of Rita's concerns.
All right, well, on to the select board's reports and comments. The first item, discussion regarding comments, is the ZBA on Surfside Crossing for to be proposal housing restrictions, continued from December 5th meeting. I think we had a letter in our packet. I know there's some members of the public that want to speak on this, but before we get to the public, any comments from the board?
I had really just 2 comments. Overall, I think the content was good. There were just 2 lines. The ones that said, applaud, and there were basically two words that were used, and I'll find them in a minute here, but one was applaud in the first. The line that's, we do think the developers recently stated a goal of having, is an admirable one. That line, and then at the bottom where it says something about applauding them. I don't, in the spirit of what you mentioned at the last meeting, where this is, to me, a very binary discussion where this is good, but I feel using that language makes it sound like the project's okay. To me, the project is still, I don't applaud the project, and I don't find it admirable. I do like the move towards having deed-restricted affordable housing. So all my request for changes would be to just keep it more just simple language, bullet points, not using the positives of admirable and applaud.
Thank you, Rita. Where actually is that?
So the admirable is starts with, we do think the developers recently stated on the first page, 1, 2, 3, third short paragraph, first page.
Oh, is
Okay.
it?
It's a third, yeah.
Okay, the admirable.
And the,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
While we applaud the intent behind including island-oriented nonprofits.
I mean, even something just, we understand the intent would be
How
fine.
about you appreciate
Appreciate. Yeah.
the intent, or?
Yeah.
Sure, we can change applaud to appreciate. I see what you mean. I don't. To me, it's almost going the other. Like we applaud your intent, but you're not really going far enough for us. Like, nice try.
Yeah, and I think, again, something, appreciate, or, again, to me, applaud and admirable are much more on the positive end, that I think, depending on how it's read.
Yeah, they could be different words.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
Especially when you pull them out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So instead of admirable, would you want to replace it with
I think,
Like understand. Even appreciate.
step in the
An
right
interesting
direction?
one.
Interesting. I actually don't even think, we can say the developers recently stated goal. Yeah, I'd have to look at that one. I thought about it earlier. I don't think we even really need to. I don't know if we even need that paragraph.
Yeah, it's more of a judgment.
Yeah.
We don't really need a judgment.
We've reviewed the developers recently stated goal of having 70% of the units. And then as the ZBA continues to, I don't even see that line as essential, but I think it could just be shortened down to, we've reviewed it, we understand the intent.
Yeah, but in fairness, I do think it is a step in the right direction. That if we go strictly by the regular 40B rules and they only have to do 25%, then we don't get this at all. So I do think they are. So I completely agree with getting rid of applaud. I think there could be a better word than admirable, but I think there needs to be some recognition that they are listening to the public and they're trying. Now, if they listen a little more, it'd be great, but,
Yeah.
you know, they're listening and they're trying,
So I think, softening that. would
I'd
be-
rather, and if I had the choice of getting only 25% affordable and getting this, I would rather have this, and I do want to get that across. Even though I would rather have something that goes further.
Is there something then? Is there an easy?
But I think I agree. Admirable is not probably the best word.
And this is really on the restricted, the possibility of being things being restricted, not on the project, not if we like it, not if we love it. So I think for me, I'm okay applauding efforts for things to be more restricted. To me, that doesn't. I can still say that and not be a fan of the total project. But I understand. It sounds like I have 4 board members who want to take those things out, so we'll go that direction. That's a consensus.
But I don't want to take out the whole paragraph.
I would be okay with it is a step in the right direction, something along those lines. Just admirable is on the spectrum of how fantastic this
praising.
is. It's
Okay. Tucker, you getting all this?
Step in the right direction.
Yeah, so in the first case, the third paragraph is moved from admirable to a step in the right direction, and then further down, rather than applaud, say appreciate. Do I have it right?
Yep. Thank you.
That was all I had.
Okay, that's good.
I mean, I thought it was generally reflective of the discussion we had had.
Anybody from the public like to speak? Just a reminder, please state your name. Well, you already did that. I guess you can do it again.
That was hours ago.
I know, that was a long time ago.
That was tonight.
Thanks for sitting through all this.
That's fine. Thank you for letting me speak. I just wanted to bring up, I don't know how many of you have been able to go to the ZBA meetings or see them, but they've been long. We'll leave it at that. But since September 26th, the public and the ZBA have been told that there will be a modified plan that will be presented for us to review, or for them to review, and that included home ownership with options for local residents, which I think is definitely something that's needed. What's been presented is a relocation of 5 very large buildings in the form of condos that each hold 12 units. They've moved from the front of the site to the back of the site, and just kind of file that away in your minds for a moment as I go on. There was a reduction from the original 156 units to 100, 40 standalone units, and then 60 condo units. There is a time frame that we have to follow, and I'm sure you're all aware of it. You know, we've gotten, I think, 3 extensions now, so we're up to the middle of February. But what has happened is, and I know Chairman Toole and the ZBA must be frustrated because the public's frustrated. The applicant keeps presenting or submitting plans that are incomplete. No elevations, no sizes to the rooms, no topography. There's just missing pieces, and I think that's something that as you move forward, if you're going to do something with, as the town, working with affordable housing with these developers, that there needs to be very specific language used in so many areas. I mean, we are just now getting to the architecture of this whole project. I mean, there's still so much that hasn't been discussed, the public isn't aware of, and yet we're asking the ZBA to act as all these other boards on plans that are submitted that are not complete. I mean, it's really I think any other board that was sitting on this would say this is an incomplete application or incomplete project. We can't make this determination. It's not permittable. And I have several letters into you since January last year indicating this. And you use the term questionable practices. I really encourage you to be very careful when you write a letter, just as you discuss this language now. It's important because the plans we looked at on the 5th, there are open basements with full bathrooms. Okay, so what does that say on Nantucket? What's going to go down there? It's not going to stay open. It's going to be a bedroom. And we're going to have cellar dwellers. And so now the density that was dropped has now actually increased because you've got incomplete plans indicating who knows what. So I just want to encourage you to continue to look at all of the pieces and you know, I will use the word applaud you for the efforts that you've put in with the natural heritage and, you know, everything else in supporting the ZBA, because they need it, you know, acting as the sewer and the water. And like I said, there are many components to this that have not even been touched on. Chairman Toole has shown his frustration, as has the board, with this. And, you know, this is not the first time these developers have done a 40B. I mean, they know what's coming down the road. So why are we getting incomplete plans? So that's my comment on this, and thank you for hearing.
Well, thank you. This letter here that we were discussing was just particularly on the restrictions, and we tried to really stay away from.
Right.
But,
At least in
but
these
here,
last two
but
conversations.
it is, except that we may be able to amend in the end, it says, in our opinion, it will be important for the applicant to produce all relevant legal documents on this topic. We could put something in there that said, as well as site plans or you know, as well as the buildings that will be, you know, housing the year-round applicant, site plan of the buildings housing the year-round. Like, we can put something in there because I think it is relevant if they're putting all the year-round into, you know, one small aspect of this. That's, you know, like in a 40B, you have to spread them out. So we could actually address a little bit of what she's saying in that last paragraph. So
I think it's out. Go ahead, Jim.
Just ask George to comment on the not allegation, but the statement that the plans are incomplete. And what ability does the ZBA have in saying, judging the completeness of an application that is along the lines of bathrooms and open basements?
Right. No, the application itself that goes back when Ilana was advising the board. That application was complete in terms of an application was required under the 40B regulations and under the local regulations. Definitely, it is a work in progress about, having said that the application itself was complete. Okay. So that it started the clock running about having a deadline that they have to act. It is definitely a work in progress in terms of the speed by which the information is coming in. I mean, having said that, a good portion of, and I always err on the side of, letting the public talk, even if it's a little bit off point on the agenda. And, the first few hearings, there was a lot of time spent on extraneous matters, repeal of 40B and this and that. And it's hard to limit comments that are sort of off point until the comment is made, to realize in hindsight that really had nothing to do with the application. So some of the hearing time has been used on, general opposition to the concept of this project, to the overall density of the project. From there, we progressed into, then the modified plan was submitted. So then the board sought further information on the modified plan. The information is coming in slowly and not quite ready for prime time in terms of how these units do break down. The board is now getting into these types of site review and design issues that are really, the nitty-gritty of the process, getting into what waivers are being sought and what the particulars are with regard to these units. The issue came up about basement units for some of the affordables. Very good point about an open basement with a bathroom. That really presents a concern about, what the full build out of these units. The design of them, how it's spread out. Recently, the issue came in about the community building, the size of that building. So the details are now starting, the board is starting to articulate what they want, and that information is starting to come in. In my opinion, this is not at the point where the board can deny this application for lack of information, because the public hearing process is going forward. They have an extension until February. As things shake out, my opinion on that may change. But at this point in the public hearing process, the developer is just getting into, trying to respond to the questions concerning the units that are being presented by the board. So that's an ongoing process now, but the application was complete. And unfortunately, that's how these hearings go. And I know people get worn down and they can't keep showing up to all these continued hearings. But the fact is, it's a big, dense project. There are a lot of issues involved. A lot of the hearing time was taken up on kind of a lot of extraneous points. And now the board is getting into that with the developer. So we're just going to have to see if the developer is in good faith in responding to the questions that are now being raised.
Maybe just a,
Sorry, I had my hand up. So just to clarify, if we get to a point where the applicant does not grant further extensions and the zoning board does not feel like the information is complete, they cannot review it properly due to lack of information.
Right.
So one of those things has to happen. Either they have to grant an extension and provide the information, or the zoning board could deny it based on being unable to make a decision
Correct.
based on a complete
Right.
application.
And I'm just saying we're not
I
at
just
that
wanted to
point
make sure
yet.
that was clear.
Yeah, absolutely that scenario could occur.
but let's say we exhausted the extensions today. And from your view, do you think the information's complete?
No.
Okay. So there's grounds right now, if today was February 15th,
Right.
to deny the application?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I also want to remind the board that this agenda item is particular to affordable housing restrictions, so we don't go too far off.
I was talking about the affordable housing in the basement, so.
No, and I'll make a motion. I'd like it to say produce all relevant, here, hang on.
Drawings.
Yes, I had, all relevant site and building plans and all relevant site, building, and legal site plans, site and building plans and legal documents on this topic for review and modification.
On this topic being
Affordable housing, like if they're gonna do this affordable housing, where is it gonna go? What's the, what are the forms of the buildings? What part of the property they're gonna be on? I think it's appropriate to add this to what we're specifying.
Suggesting the ZBA.
Yeah, we don't want to just see the legal documents for this if they're gonna put in, they're not going to, but if they're gonna put them all in 4 buildings on the corner of the property, so.
I mean, I think we can add that, but I think the idea of this was to have council be able to review the legal documents based on how they were going to impose these restrictions.
Right, that's true too, but I think all of it.
Yeah. Matt wants to add that in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is the board okay with that?
Absolutely.
I think I saw everybody's heads. So Tucker, then Joe.
Just quickly, as I think as the board knows, I think your original intention with this letter was to specifically address the affordability aspect, as the chair noted. I just was going to mention, the last session with the ZBA was heavily focused on architecture, and my understanding is that the applicant will be, between that meeting and the next meeting, be getting feedback, if you will, from the HDC on the designs, in addition to some significant feedback that they were given by the ZBA in their role as acting for the HDC. As well, I think the board should take some comfort that, Ed Marchant is the 40B advisor to the ZBA. He's bringing things to the ZBA's attention directly, obviously, about, for instance, the fact that the original design for the condominiums had 22 units of the 60, basically all being basement units, which I think really shocked Ed as well as the entire ZBA, and they received, quite a bit of feedback about that. Ed would insist that none of those could be the affordable units if that was sort of the way that they were planning on going. So I just want to let you know there's a lot of input coming into the ZBA on a variety of these topics.
Thank you.
Just 2 points. It's Jill V. Just 2 points. One is that we learned in the previous development that this developer did at Beach Plum that the affordable units did not have air conditioning. So that's something where the market rate units do. The other issue is on HDC, because you're right, that came up a lot about the plans. I understood that Sachem's Path, every house in Sachem's Path had to go to the HDC. Did it not?
It was voluntary.
It was
voluntary on their part.
So you all didn't make them do that, or no one made them do that?
There's not a requirement, because the ZBA speaks for all the boards that we've been talking about. But I think it just wanting to be good neighbors, the HMPAS developer said we want to go through that process.
Okay, well, I just didn't know if that's something that you
Yeah.
could, I know they're meeting with the HDC, but they also, like we said, these plans are not, they're not worthy of people really looking at. So I just would make that point. If they could be encouraged that every building go to HDC, you know, the community building that they have is up to 40 feet tall now. So, you know, they're just, the community building has the bowling alleys and all those things, and are the affordable units, do they get charged differently than the people who are in market rate units, those kinds of things, and that all tied into what you're saying here with the affordable. So thank you.
When I was on the HDC, we reviewed more than one 40B project, but it was always advisory, but it was very similar to a standard HDC review. We just never issued a COA. We gave the comments over on the different unit layouts to the zoning board.
Yeah, thank you about the air conditionings. I think we need to pay attention to those details on affordable units.
Yeah.
It's really important.
And that's
I'm sure
actually-
ZBA is, but sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry to cut across, but I think that it was something I was going to ask Tucker if he had any thoughts on it. But to Matt's point, you know, I think we focus so much on the numbers. One of my concerns is about the quality of life and making sure that there is, you know, if that's not specifically under the purview of HTC or ZBA, is that being properly addressed, and not having air conditioning units or allowing basement, you know, all those kind of things. Is it being properly considered throughout the whole application?
I think one of the things that has been stressed in prior comments to the ZBA is, you know, the need that there is parity between the affordable units and the market rate units on exactly these types of issues.
And if they're with the apartment buildings, where there won't be any market rate in the apartment building, correct, or no?
The condominiums?
Condominiums, yeah.
Yeah, well, there will be market, the stated intention of the developer is that there would be the required 80% restricted units, and the others would be market, but limited to year-round buyers,
Right.
year-round resident buyers.
Sort of the deed restrictions that we were.
Yes.
But they would all be deed restricted, I think was.
Yeah,
my question.
and you know, again, this is a point that Ed has made, and I think you all are making in this letter, that it's important before the ZBA is asked to make its final determination that we receive these legal documents for town council to review and ensure that the intention translates into those.
And there's a greater discrepancy between the houses, with a number of market rates being proposed as larger 5 bedrooms, and none of the affordables are.
Sorry. I guess my understanding, just to let you know, and Tucker, you can chime in, they have not yet determined where the affordable houses are going to be in this development. So, you know, this is all important as to what you're saying, Don, but the bottom line is we still don't know where they're going to be. I mean, at one point they were all in the condos and they moved them. And I know that Mass Housing and all the state agencies that supply the funding are very clear about not creating an economic disparity when you have affordable housing and market rate housing. And what's happened now by moving those, first having the condos is not keeping Nantucket in mind, but moving them from the front of the site when you come in to the back and sort of hiding them, it's like, well, what are we saying here? So we don't know where they're going to go yet.
But in to that point, you know, and just so it's clear, the NPDC and this board, you know, all have opposed the condos. But to that point, I think that's, you know, sort of one thing you're not supposed to do is have it, you know, be a separation and be, you know, stigmatized. I think just the fact that we have those buildings and then all the other ones, I think they are. So that's sort of part of my thinking. A, it's not appropriate from a design standpoint. It's too far away from, you know, from the Mid-Island, but it's also, you're setting up sort of, there's the, you know, apartment buildings and there's the fancy homes. You know, yeah, the haves and the haves not. There you go. Thank you. That's even better. So, you know, so I just think so I think that's part of, you know, the process is sort of how do they flesh that out, you know, and I would love to see it go back to less density and, you know, even if some duplexes that look like houses among the houses at a lot less density would be, a better place to live and more in keeping with that neighborhood. So I'm hoping that through this process, that's where we end up.
And I also, just to your comment on some of the comments on parity, is that my only concern with what we're setting up is if everything's deed restricted and the parity is based on market rate, then I think you don't have that same sort of upper level comparison to make, because they're now all none are market rate. Does that make sense? I basically just am concerned about them cutting corners when it's 100% deed restricted, cutting corners wherever they can to the detriment of quality of life. And I think that the way we set it up is great, but there's opportunities for that to be misapplied.
I think it goes back to what Matt added into the letter about seeing where things are going and getting more information might help us look at that. Tucker?
I was just gonna maybe reemphasize what Mrs. Perry and Matt were. So I think that is one of the things that the ZBA requested at the last meeting during the discussion about architecture and site plan was the specific designation of where are the affordable units, and I believe the specific plans for essentially each and every building in there. They had previously provided sort of, this is typical building A and typical building B and so forth, and the ZBA has asked, for the specifics building by building, lot by lot.
Any other comments? All right. That was a good discussion. Thank you. Committee reports.
I'll be screening straws at New School tomorrow. So, and then it'll be at the Lighthouse School later in the month. And we had a coming together of various stakeholders in the Vineyard Wind Section 106 process before it had mostly been myself, Lauren, David Worth, sort of representing the town, and then there were certain stakeholders at the BOEM meeting, and now there are other organizations that have identified themselves as stakeholders, particularly with historic properties, as part of the conversation. So that will be continued, and the end goal again is getting short and long-term commitment from Vineyard Wind for support of Nantucket wind project preservation projects based on the impact to the island.
Thank you, Rita. Anybody else? Comments?
It's just one comment. The Salem opened a marijuana shop. I don't know if anyone read in the paper, and they learned from the other two that have opened, and they are doing for the medical can walk in, but for recreational it's by appointment only, and people go online and they type in that they want to visit, and they have so many times a day, and so they set up by appointment. And they've got on their website, they're trying to get them to take the train and not park in certain areas. And they have a bus, and you can only get on the bus if you have an appointment to drive to this location. And one of the comments that they had was they were glad they didn't open up first because their town would have been overrun. And they said they're very happy they've learned from what these other guys are experiencing. And it was the interesting part to me is their recreational only are projected at 600 a day. So they're taking 600 appointments per day. So that's the volume. So 600 times $50, $80, they're talking $50,000, whatever the number is, just for recreational alone, which is in keeping with what's happening in the other two towns. So as this rolls out, we may want to think about that, because if we're going to have 600 or 1,200 or 1,800 cars trying, if we don't do something like this, if we have issues, this may be a way to handle it. So.
And just to follow on there, I did hear some concerns from business owners on Amelia about operating hours, and I realized I don't think we addressed that the way we do with liquor licenses or anything like that, and that might be a way to, again, control some of the traffic if we did consider operating hours.
Not a bad idea. I never thought about it before, but
we haven't done the license yet. I figured
it'll be
hours of operation would be part of that. I think we did discuss it a little bit at one point.
I didn't want to forget it.
And planning board usually has that in their decision.
Mm-hmm.
And the other point on these is the growers have met a little bit, and I'm not sure it's a co-op. I think Rita can talk to a little bit, but
yeah, the So some of the small scale growers have met, and what was interesting, and I would like to send notes to Libby, Andrew, and Katie. They actually wouldn't prefer a co-op, so it would be more of a small scale craft grower. And some of the ideas they came up with was we're limiting licenses by canopy size, and fairly limited. It's a fairly small canopy, having different scales even within that small canopy with different licensing fees. So they came up with some good ideas that you will be seeing, but the co-op doesn't actually seem to suit. And I think even with the co-op, we would have had to apply for a special extension of how many members can be in a co-op, so it might work better.
Because
And
I think they limit it to five.
yeah. And I also think that there was mention of micro businesses in the CCC. I would just think I have to explore it a bit more, but I do think that the CCC does sort of address some of these very small scale growers. So more to come.
Yeah, which might be which is what we might want to encourage here,
Mhm.
to keep that business here. So.
Yeah.
Can I go
Libby?
back to something
Yeah.
quickly? Did you approve that letter to ZBA?
Yes.
We didn't take a motion.
We take a motion,
Okay,
but I
but
think
consensus is to send it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. And Tucker went through like the three things, our three changes. Yeah. I just had a
Do you
couple.
want a motion?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
It's just, you and I need to talk about it. It's gotta be fixed up a bit.
Okay. I just had a couple things on 38 Main Street. I meant to say it when they were here, but I wanted to applaud them. Just having a business downtown, it's going to really help downtown having that property owner operated. There's a big difference having someone from off island operate it. You're going to put locals in there. You're going to know the bartender. You're going to know the servers, and I think it's going to really help downtown. In the off season, and in the summer as well. So I applaud their efforts. That's a big property. It's a big rent. It's a big undertaking. So I'm glad that we know who it is. So I was happy about that. And I want to just alert the board on something that the FCC is doing. They're giving what's pretty much is a corporate handout to companies like Comcast. And so they're allowing, it's not final yet, but I'm going to try to keep this as simple as possible. So they do franchise fees, right? So we get, say, 3% of the bill comes back to NCTV 18 to air this, to air Charlie Walters shows, all the work they do in the high school. And if this FCC thing changes, they're gonna take the value of the public access television station and put that into that 3%, and say you don't have to pay that because there's the value of this public access channel. So we could be. I talked to the president of NCTV 18, Dan Driscoll, today, and they talked to the attorneys. They think it could be 33 to 50% of their income, their operating budget could be hit.
Yeah.
Depending on where this falls. So December 14th, this Friday, is the last day that you can send a letter to the FCC kind of opposing this. So I was going to write a letter just from me as the NCTV, not representing this board because we didn't really approve it. 8,053 letters have been sent so far. And so it just really worries me that all the good work that this channel, public access, has done, we could keep it. We'd have to locally pay for it if this
So
happened.
is it appropriate or out of order for us to take a position on that now?
I don't think so.
So I'd make a motion that we authorize the chair to send a letter opposing the proposed changes to the allocation by the FCC of certain franchise fees.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. I just want you guys to be aware of that. And that's all I had. Anything else? Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for this.
I'm sure we have some things to sign. Oh. It's just something nice to pick up.